Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the June 2025 monthly Current Affairs Masterclass, brought to you by Simplified UPSC by PPP. We are about to plunge into the essential insights from this past month, and as always, we'll be linking that foundational knowledge with the most critical developments shaping India and the world right now. But before we jump straight into the source material, we do have a small, humble request. Creating these really detailed compilations, the synthesis, the research, all the intellectual effort that goes into connecting these current events to the core concepts, it's a significant amount of work. So if you are capable and you truly find high value of this content, please consider hitting the join button below to become a paid member on YouTube. Your support is absolutely crucial. It's what keeps this research channel alive and allows us to consistently bring you content of this quality and depth. And to all of you who already stand with us, a massive, heartfelt shout out to our existing members. You are genuinely the pillars of this channel. Thank you so much for your continued support. Also, just a quick call to action. Please like this deep dive right now and leave a comment.
It is honestly the simplest way to help us reach more serious learners just like you. Okay, let's get started. We have a packed agenda today. We're beginning with the monumental democratic legacy of Jayaprakash Narayan, then shifting to cultural preservation, the future of the digital census, and some really heavy strategic security challenges in West Asia. So we'll begin with a look back. The 1974 Bihar movement and the monumental figure of Jayaprakash Narayan, or JP as he's known. This moment, it feels like such a crucial, almost electrifying pivot point in post-independence India. Given the anniversary, his core philosophy, the total revolution or Sampurna Kranti, it comes right back into sharp focus. We know it was a protest against corruption, but its ambition was so much wider than just political opposition, wasn't it? What was the philosophical breadth of JP's vision?
Well, the word Sampurna total, that's the key right there.
Yeah.
JP's movement was, it was certainly catalyzed by the immediate socioeconomic unrest of the mid-1970s.
Right, things were bad.
They were. Rampant inflation, sky-high unemployment, and, pervasive allegations of corruption against the ruling establishment. But he saw all of these issues as just symptoms.
Symptoms of something deeper.
Exactly. A much deeper ethical and structural rot within India's centralized democracy. JP was, you have to remember, profoundly influenced by Gandhian and Sarvodaya principles. So his goal was not merely a change in government. It was a complete ethical, social, and democratic regeneration. This ambition crystallized into 5 simultaneous pillars of revolution. It's so crucial to understand these because they show just how comprehensive his critique of the entire system really was.
Okay, let's detail those 5 pillars because they sound like the blueprint for understanding how he tried to reshape the entire socio-political landscape.
Certainly. So the first was the political revolution. JP flat out rejected the high centralization of power he saw in New Delhi.
The top-down model.
The top-down model. He advocated for a bottom-up, genuine participatory democracy rooted in decentralized units like the village or local committees. He even termed this partyless democracy.
Partyless democracy. What did that mean in practice?
It was a system where accountability was mandated from the grassroots upward. It was specifically designed to counter the powerful, often opaque bureaucracy that had, emerged since independence. And this dovetailed perfectly with the second pillar, the economic revolution. This was his direct answer to the stark socioeconomic disparities plaguing rural India at the time. His core demands focused on equitable land redistribution. He was a firm believer that the tiller should own the land and the urgent need for people-centric development models.
So making sure that growth actually reached the poor.
Precisely. Ensuring that economic growth directly addressed the needs of the rural and urban poor rather than flowing exclusively to industrial centers.
So the political and the economic spheres were deeply intertwined. It was all about issues of power and resource allocation. But he didn't stop there. He also targeted the societal structures themselves, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to the third pillar, the social revolution. JP saw these entrenched issues like casteism, gender discrimination, and the social scourge of dowry as fundamental blocks to any kind of genuine national equality.
So he was going after the very fabric of society.
He was. This pillar was aimed squarely at creating a truly egalitarian society by dismantling these traditional hierarchies and societal ills. It was a demand for radical social restructuring right alongside the economic changes. Then you have the fourth, the educational revolution. He proposed a transformation of the curriculum itself. This wasn't about grades or exams, it was about values.
Interesting. What kind of values?
He championed an ethics-based curriculum, one focused on instilling robust civic duties, promoting rural development initiatives, and emphasizing vocational empowerment. The goal was to make education relevant, useful, and socially anchored, a true preparation for active citizenship. And finally, you have arguably the most challenging pillar, the cultural spiritual revolution.
Okay, that sounds ambitious.
It was. This sought moral rejuvenation and self-discipline. JP believed that without individual transformation, without a kind of moral cleansing of the national character, all the political and economic reforms would ultimately fail. It demanded a commitment to self-discipline and unity from every single citizen.
That level of holistic change, ethical, social, economic, it sounds almost impossibly utopian today.
Yeah.
Did JP recognize how challenging it would be to demand moral cleansing alongside political reform? I mean, it's a vision that requires not just policy changes, but a change in human nature itself.
Oh, he absolutely recognized the challenge, which is precisely why he put the onus on the students and the youth, the generation he believed was least corrupted by the political system at the time. His call for Sampurna Kranti was, at its heart, a call for eternal vigil and sustained peaceful action by citizens to hold power accountable.
What's so fascinating is the immediate, tangible legacy of that mobilization. It wasn't just some philosophical discourse in a university. The movement served as the crucible for an entire generation of political leaders. So what was the lasting impact on Indian democracy, specifically on political careers and civic consciousness?
Well, the primary measurable impact was the radical scale of youth political mobilization. The movement wasn't just led by JP. It was executed by students who became the political figures of the next 30 years.
Right. You can draw a straight line from that movement to modern politics.
A very straight line. You have the prime examples in figures like Lalu Prasad, Nishu Kumar, and Sushil Modi. All of them were student leaders, deeply involved in the Bihar movement. They went on to fundamentally reshape Bihar's polity for decades. The movement effectively trained them in mass leadership and organizational tactics. And more broadly, it dramatically deepened civic consciousness. The movement fundamentally mainstreamed this idea of public accountability, especially around corruption and electoral practices. It empowered citizens to engage directly and demand transparency, and that, in a way, changed the expectations of the electorate permanently.
And it reinforced a certain method of protest.
Yes. It reasserted the strategic significance of nonviolent resistance against perceived authoritarianism. That precedent resonated through subsequent decades, and you can see its influence in movements like Anna Hazar's anti-corruption campaigns much, much later.
Now, the immense political turmoil that was generated by the total revolution, it had a direct and, frankly, terrifying consequence: the declaration of the emergency. This is one of the most significant static concepts in post-independence Indian history. How precisely did JP's movement serve as the proximate cause?
The movement's success in mobilizing these massive protests, combined with a few key legal events, specifically the Allahabad High Court judgment that found the then Prime Minister guilty of electoral malpractice, it all created a perfect storm, a constitutional and political crisis.
And that's what led to the declaration.
That culminated in the declaration of the emergency on June 25, 1975. The declaration itself was made under Article 352 of the Constitution, which allowed the president to declare an emergency based on a threat to the security of India.
And the specific justification used was a very particular phrase, wasn't it?
It was. The justification used was internal disturbance. And this phrase effectively allowed the suspension of civil liberties, fundamental rights, and it radically altered governance structures. It led to widespread arrests of opposition leaders, including JP himself.
And the abuses that occurred during that period, which were revealed later, led to a critical constitutional safeguard that remains in place today.
Absolutely. The backlash against the excesses of the emergency was immense. This led to the formation of the Shah Commission in 1977 to investigate all the abuses.
And the findings were damning.
They were. And the findings of this commission directly informed the legislative action that was taken to prevent future such declarations. This resulted in the 44th Constitutional Amendment in 1978.
And this amendment specifically targeted that phrase, internal disturbance.
It did. It was passed specifically to tighten the provisions for invoking Article 352. The crucial change was the replacement of that vague and, as we saw, easily misused term, internal disturbance, with the much, much stricter criterion of armed rebellion.
So what does that mean in practice now?
It means that mere civil unrest or peaceful political protests, like JP's total revolution, can no longer be used as a constitutional justification for declaring a national emergency. This amendment is a direct and enduring constitutional legacy born out of the trauma of 1975.
That connection is just so vital, understanding how these massive political movements directly shape the constitutional framework we live under today. Now, let's move from the socio-political movements that shape our history to the very foundation of India's identity. Art, culture, and heritage revival will shift focus to the cultural foundations that these democratic movements, in a way, sought to protect. And we begin with a tribute to a tribal freedom fighter and reformer who remains a figure of immense cultural and historical weight, Bhagwan Birsa Munda. What are the essential facts we must understand about Dharti Abba and the resistance he led?
Birsa Munda is deeply revered. He's known as Dharti Abba, which translates to the father of the earth. He belonged to the Munda tribe of the Chotanagpur Plateau, so primarily in modern-day Jharkhand. His resistance in the late 19th century was really multifaceted. He was a spiritual reformer leading the syncretic Birsa faith. He was a folk hero and a very powerful political activist who mobilized his people against both colonial and feudal oppression.
So where did that conflict come from? What was the core issue?
His core conflict was focused specifically on the devastating consequences of the British-imposed zamindari system in that region. This system was absolutely catastrophic because it directly destroyed the traditional tribal land ownership structure, the system known as Kunkati.
Can you elaborate on the Kunkati system? Why was its destruction so culturally and economically harmful?
The Kunkati system was a system of communal ownership. The entire tribe or clan held proprietary rights over the forest and the cultivated land as a collective. It was their ancestral right.
So it wasn't about individual plots of land.
Not at all. It recognized the community's right to clear the forest and cultivate the land based on these ancestral claims. The British, through the introduction of the zamindari system and later the permanent settlement, they just replaced this communal model with individual, private, taxable land holdings. And this shift allowed non-tribal landlords and moneylenders, the daikas as they were called to, easily acquire tribal lands when the tribes defaulted on payments, which happened often due to high taxes or crop failures.
And the result was?
The result was that the Munda and other tribes were rapidly reduced to landless bonded laborers, a brutal practice known locally as Beth Begari, forced labor.
So Birsa Munda's fight was for their very survival.
It was. He mobilized the tribals to defend their ancestral rights, demanding the return of their collective ownership and fighting against both the British revenue policies and the exploitation by local landlords. His resistance was fundamental to preserving their socio-economic and cultural survival.
That is such a powerful illustration of cultural resistance being intrinsically tied to livelihood and land rights. Now, shifting dramatically to Goa, we look at the Ghumot, which is a classic case of cultural conservation colliding head-on with wildlife law.
The Ghumot is a really fascinating cultural artifact. It's a traditional mud-based membranophone percussion instrument, a drum with a very distinctive sound, and it's deeply integral to Goan folk music.
So you'd hear it at all the big festivals.
Exactly. You hear it during major festivals like Saujao, Ganesh Chaturthi, and Shigmo. And recognizing its importance, the state government rightly declared it the state heritage instrument back in 2019. However, the challenge to its revival is significant. Traditionally, the instrument's unique membrane, the part that gives it its distinct sonic quality, was made from the skin of a monitor lizard.
And there's the problem.
There's the problem. The monitor lizard has been protected under the Comprehensive Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 for decades. Post-2019, with increased enforcement and awareness, the traditional practice has become entirely illegal and unethical.
So you have a declared heritage instrument whose authentic production method is legally prohibited. That's a tough conservation paradox. How are artisans adapting, and what's the cultural risk here?
It creates an immediate ethical and legal hurdle, as you said. Artisans are now actively being forced to adapt to legal alternatives, primarily using goat skin or increasingly synthetic membranes.
But does that change the sound?
It does, and that's the risk. While this is necessary for conservation and legality, it directly impacts the instrument's traditional sound and longevity. The unique resonance of the Ghumot is tied to the tension and the texture of the monitor lizard skin. So the risk is twofold. First, the specialized knowledge of how to prepare the traditional hide is being lost. And second, the instrument's distinct sonic signature may fundamentally change. This could potentially erode its cultural importance and the ability of traditional musicians to pass on the authentic performance styles. The current conversation is all about government support for research into legal substitutes that can closely mimic the original acoustic qualities.
That detail about the sonic quality makes the conflict so much clearer. Sticking with foundations, let's turn to archaeology with a new discovery that's pushing the known boundaries of the early Harappan civilization in Gujarat, the Lakkapar site.
Yes, Lakkapar. It's located in the Kutch district of Gujarat, specifically near the older, well-known Junakatiya site. Recent excavations by the University of Kerala's Department of Archaeology revealed a previously unknown early Harappan habitation and burial site. They've tentatively dated it between 3300 and 2600 BCE.
What makes this finding so monumental? I mean, Gujarat is already so rich in Harappan-era sites like Dolavira and Lothal.
The significance lies in a very specific artifact. The discovery of a human burial in a pit accompanied by a distinct type of pottery known as pre-Pravas pottery.
Okay, pre-Prabhas pottery.
This is absolutely the first time such a burial linking these specific cultural elements has ever been found in Gujarat.
So why does that specific pottery matter so much?
It matters because this pottery type is traditionally associated with the Chalcolithic cultures of Saurashtra sites, like Pravaspaten, also known as Veraval, and Detrana. Finding it at Lakkapar, deep in Kutch, confirms a direct cultural link. It's just an interaction, or maybe even a migration, between the Chalcolithic people of peninsular India, Saurashtra, and the early phases of the Harappan civilization in the Kutch and Sindh region way back in the 4th millennium BCE.
So it's not just another news site, it's evidence that challenges those linear models of history. It's showing the coexistence and interaction of early Harappan precursors with indigenous agro-pastoralist communities. This expands the known geography and the complexity of early Harappan influence, highlighting Gujarat's role as this major cultural corridor connecting Sindh to the Deccan.
You've nailed it. That's the real aha moment.
Fantastic. Now, let's pivot from these deep cultural foundations to the machinery of governance and accountability, how technology and transparency are redefining public institutions and voter trust. We have to move to the critical issue of registered unrecognized political parties, or RUPPs.
Yeah.
What is the scope of this crisis when it comes to electoral integrity?
The issue of RUPPs is it's one of the most critical challenges to financial transparency in Indian politics today. The Election Commission of India, the ECI, recently took some decisive action. They initiated the delisting of 345 RUPPs that were either untraceable or had failed to contest elections since 2019.
Basically, they were just shell entities.
That's the suspicion. And the scale of the problem is just staggering. As of 2025, India has over 2,800 RUPPs. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 97% of all registered parties in the country falling into this unrecognized category.
97%, that's incredible.
It is. And while it is very easy to register a party under Section 29A of the Representation of the People Act, 1951, the ease of registration, coupled with minimal regulatory oversight, has led to widespread structural misuse.
What is the specific incentive driving the formation and persistence of these, essentially non-electoral entities? Why do they exist?
The primary incentive is financial. Specifically, it's about tax loopholes. RUPPs enjoy significant income tax exemptions under Section 13A of the Income Tax Act. They can receive donations, and those funds are exempt from taxation, provided they maintain specific accounts and submit reports.
But that's where the problem is, right? The reporting.
Exactly. The crisis arises because many RUPPs exploit this exemption despite having negligible electoral activity. The ECI reports show alarming non-compliance. For instance, less than 5% even submitted required donation reports between 2013 and 2016.
Wow.
This lack of transparency strongly suggests that many RUPPs function as potential conduits for opaque financial flows, facilitating money laundering and exploiting tax exemptions, particularly around election cycles when political funding surges. The ECI's delisting drive is a critical attempt to clean up the electoral finance system by enforcing the requirement for verifiable presence and sustained electoral engagement.
That structural misuse directly undermines the public's trust in the financial fairness of politics. Connecting this theme of data and political power, let's look at the transformative 16th Census of India. This is shaping up to be far more than just a routine headcount, especially after a 16-year gap.
It is historic on multiple fronts. The government announced the 16th census is set to conclude by March 2027 with an October 2026 cutoff for snowbound areas. The sheer size of this exercise is monumental. We're talking about the training of over 3 million enumerators. And crucially, this census introduces two...
And that will inevitably lead to new political demands.
Inevitably. It will lead to demands for proportional representation and revised resource allocation across the board. The data gathered will instantly become the foundation for a renewed and often very contentious debate over social justice and equity in India.
And the immediate constitutional domino effect of this new data is the very sensitive process of delimitation.
The stakes could not be higher. This new, comprehensive, digitized data will guide the highly sensitive delimitation of Lok Sabha and Assembly seats post-2026. This process is mandated to ensure that, as far as practicable, seats represent approximately equal population sizes.
And this is critical because we're still using ancient data for that.
Very ancient. Currently, seat allocation is based on the highly outdated 1971 census figures. That system was frozen primarily to encourage southern states to prioritize family planning without a political penalty. But this freeze has created significant disparities, particularly favoring states that had lower population growth compared to the high-growth states of the north.
So this new data will rebalance political power.
Fundamentally, once the 16th census data is utilized, it will fundamentally reshape political representation. It will potentially increase the number of seats significantly and alter the relative power of different states in the Lok Sabha for decades to come.
That census data is just fundamental to the nation's political future. Speaking of new legal architecture, we saw the center notify regulations for Ladakh, creating its first indigenous legal framework post-bifurcation. What specific demands of the local population were addressed by these regulations enacted under Article 240?
Well, the regulations were notified by the President under Article 240, which allows the President to make regulations for the peace, progress, and good governance of specific Union territories. The focus here was clearly on addressing key local demands related to identity preservation, land, and job security following the region's bifurcation from Jammu and Kashmir.
So what were the key changes?
A major step was taken to ensure job security for locals. The new Ladakh Civil Services Decentralization and Recruitment Regulation introduces domicile-based job reservations in government employment. This is absolutely vital in a region with limited economic opportunity, as it safeguards the interests of the indigenous population from outside competition. Furthermore, the Ladakh Official Languages Regulation is significant in protecting cultural identity. It recognizes English, Hindi, Urdu, Bhoti, and Purji as official languages for administration.
But it also goes further than that.
It does, and this is equally important. It actively promotes 4 key tribal languages, Shina, Brokskat, Balti, and Ladakhi, to ensure the preservation of linguistic and tribal heritage, preventing their marginalization in governance.
And what about the reform related to grassroots governance, specifically gender parity in the Ladakh Autonomous Hill Development Councils, the LAHDCs?
That was a critical governance reform. The LAHDC Act was amended to reserve 1/3 of seats for women using a rotational system. This directly strengthens gender parity in local self-governance, ensuring greater female participation in local decision-making. These regulations, taken together, have established Ladakh's first region-specific legal system tailored to its unique sociocultural realities, moving it away from relying on rules inherited from the former state of J&K.
That focus on local languages and governance capacity leads us neatly to the Digital Integration Initiative at the very grassroots, the Bhashini project linking up with Panchayati Raj. The idea that AI can facilitate hyper-local democracy is truly fascinating.
This is a powerful demonstration of using cutting-edge technology for genuine digital inclusion. We saw in MOU, signed between the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, MOPR, and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, MEITI, specifically to leverage the National Language Translation Mission, Bhashini.
So what's the goal here?
The core objective is to dismantle language barriers in rural governance. Bhashini uses AI-driven, real-time speech and text translation capabilities to create an inclusive, multilingual e-governance ecosystem for panchayats.
Can you give us a practical example of how this might work on the ground?
Sure. Think of a citizen in a remote village trying to access services through an e-governance platform, like eGram Swaraj. Historically, these interfaces might primarily use English, or maybe Hindi.
Which is a huge barrier for many people.
A massive barrier. With Bhashini integration, that same citizen can now interact with the digital platform, submit documents, or attend virtual panchayat meetings using their own local language, whether it's spoken or typed. The system provides real-time translation for both communication and documentation. This inclusion directly promotes participatory democracy by ensuring every citizen can interact with public services transparently, regardless of their linguistic proficiency in a standardized language.
That transition from paper-based, single-language systems to a fully interactive, multilingual digital ecosystem is a huge step. It's like realizing the decentralized accountability J.P. Narayan dreamt of, but through a 21st century technological lens. Now we have to shift abruptly. From internal governance to global flashpoints and strategic security, the international stage is reeling from a direct, dangerous reshaping of West Asian geopolitics, triggered by recent military conflict and the constant shadow of nuclear escalation.
The tensions are, frankly, unprecedented. We have moved decisively past the era of relying solely on proxy conflicts. We've seen Israel launch strikes targeting deep Iranian nuclear sites operations, reportedly with names like Operation Rising Lion or Midnight Hammer. Iran, in turn, has responded with substantial direct ballistic missile attacks, which they've labeled Operation True Promise 3. This signals a new, highly dangerous phase of high-stakes, direct military engagement.
It's the directness that's so new and scary.
It is, and let's focus on the technological gravity of the targets. Operations like Midnight Hammer were aimed at deep underground facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, which are central to uranium enrichment. The sheer engineering challenge here is immense. I mean, facilities like Fordo are buried 80 meters deep into a mountain.
And to strike those targets, the reports mention US B-2 bombers deploying a massive weapon, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator.
Precisely. The Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, is an incredible piece of engineering. It's a 30,000-pound conventional bunker buster, specifically designed to penetrate reinforced concrete structures buried hundreds of feet underground.
So it's a specialized tool for a specialized job.
Its deployment against Iran's facilities underscores the strategic objective to eliminate the possibility of a nuclear breakout capability that is shielded deep beneath the earth.
The entire conflict really revolves around uranium enrichment. Could you quickly clarify the difference between the enrichment levels we hear discussed, particularly that 60% figure?
It's crucial to understand the chemistry. Natural uranium is primarily uranium-238. For nuclear reactions, you need the fissile isotope, uranium-235. So, low-enriched uranium, or LEU, contains about 3% to 5% U-235. That's exclusively used for generating electricity in civilian power reactors. Highly enriched uranium, HEU in contrast, must be enriched to around 90% U-235 content to be considered weapons-grade material. That's what you need for compact, efficient nuclear weapons.
And Iran is at 60%.
Iran is currently enriching up to 60%. Now, while 60% is not weaponization, it represents a very short technical jump to that 90% threshold. The 60% level is dangerously close to breakout capability because the majority of the technical effort required to get to 90% is actually expended in reaching the 20% mark. The path from 20% to 60% and then 60% to 90% is progressively faster and easier. That's what makes these 60% enrichment sites prime targets for preemptive strikes.
The military planning in this volatile region is also continuously defined by Israel's long-standing nuclear posture, the one known as the Samson option. Given its severity, we need to understand exactly what that doctrine entails.
The Samson option is Israel's unconfirmed, but, let's be frank, universally acknowledged nuclear deterrence doctrine. It states that in the event of an imminent existential threat, one that risks the total destruction of the state, Israel would unleash a massive, comprehensive nuclear retaliation against its attackers.
So it's the ultimate last resort.
It is. The doctrine operates on a policy of strategic ambiguity. Israel neither confirms nor denies the existence of its arsenal. And this ambiguity is its strength. It's a psychological deterrent that signals to adversaries that any attempt to annihilate Israel would trigger catastrophic, multi-platform nuclear retaliation, ensuring the mutual destruction of the aggressor. It reinforces Israel's strategic depth and serves as the ultimate guarantor of national survival in the region.
But doesn't a doctrine that hinges on ambiguity become fundamentally unstable when an adversary like Iran publicly escalates the threat of proliferation?
It absolutely introduces instability. The threat of the Samson option, coupled with the immediate conflict, has led to an alarming global proliferation risk. In response to these intensifying strikes, Iran's parliament is preparing a bill that could trigger its withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
And the NPT is the bedrock of non-proliferation.
It's the global cornerstone for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. Should Iran withdraw an option available under Article X of the treaty if a member feels its supreme national interests are threatened, it would instantly dismantle decades of international diplomacy and monitoring. It would remove all constraints on their enrichment program, escalating the global risk of proliferation and potentially triggering a regional nuclear arms race involving powers like Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
That is a major geopolitical development. Bringing the focus back home, we saw a key induction for the Indian Coast Guard that highlights our push for indigenous defense technology under Atmanirbhar.
Yes, the Indian Coast Guard, or ICG, inducted the fast patrol vessel Adamya. It's the first in an 8-vessel series being built by Goa Shipyard Limited, GSL. This vessel is crucial for enhancing the ICG's quick reaction capability for search and rescue operations, anti-smuggling, and general coastal surveillance.
The technological significance here isn't just that it was built domestically, right? It involved the integration of specific, high-tech components.
That's right. The Adamya is the first vessel in its class to feature controllable pitch propellers, or CP2s, and fully indigenous gearboxes. This is a real leap in indigenous marine technology.
How do controllable pitch propellers specifically enhance the vessel's quick reaction capability compared to standard systems? What's the advantage?
Okay, so traditional fixed pitch propellers have blades that are permanently set at one angle. To reverse thrust or change speed significantly, you have to change the engine speed drastically, which takes time. CPPs, however, allow the pitch or the angle of the propeller blades to be adjusted without changing the engine's rotational speed. This provides much quicker and more precise maneuverability. It enables the vessel to accelerate, stop, or reverse thrust almost instantly.
Which is vital in a chase or a rescue.
Absolutely vital during dynamic high-speed pursuits or complex SAR operations where responsiveness saves lives. This success really promotes the Atmanirbhar vision by showcasing GSL's capability to integrate these cutting-edge domestically developed systems.
Moving now to the economy. The latest RBI report shows some concerning trends regarding the quality of capital entering India. It sounds like a mixed picture, where high gross inflows might be hiding some structural weaknesses.
That is precisely the narrative. The RBI's latest findings on foreign direct investment, FDI, inflows highlight several worrying structural concerns. While the gross inflows might fluctuate, the long-term stability is sluggish. It's showing an average of just 0.3% annual growth over the last 4 years. That indicates a stagnation in high-commitment, long-term capital formation.
But the net figure is the real story.
The net figure, which accounts for money leaving, is far more alarming. Net FDI has halved to $29.6 billion recently. This massive drop is largely attributable to a surge in repatriations and disinvestments, with annual repatriation growing at a rate of 18.9% post-pandemic.
So more money is leaving, or at least leaving faster.
It suggests that existing foreign investors are pulling profits or selling assets faster than new, high-quality capital is entering the market. This indicates reduced long-term stability and confidence.
And if the net flow is falling, what does the composition tell us about the quality of the investment that is coming in?
The composition suggests low quality and low productivity. There has been a significant decline in the share of FDI flowing into the core economy. For example, investment in manufacturing has dropped significantly to just 12% of the total, down from previous peak levels.
So where is the money going?
Conversely, there is a distinct dominance of financial flows, specifically inflows from jurisdictions like Singapore and Mauritius. This phenomenon is often linked to regulatory arbitrage, tax treaties, or even round-tripping. It means the capital is geared more toward financial maneuvering and short-term gains rather than establishing permanent productive industrial capacity in India. For sustained economic resilience, policymakers must urgently attract reform-driven, high-quality FDI focused on creating durable assets and jobs.
That is vital context for understanding our true economic health versus just the headline numbers. Now let's pivot to infrastructure and clean energy, where we're seeing a major technological milestone that could solve the grid stability problem created by intermittent renewables like solar and wind.
This development is truly a game changer for grid management in India. We're talking about the commissioning of India's first variable speed pumped storage plant, or PSP unit. This initial 250 milliW unit is part of the larger 1,000 milliW Terry PSP in Uttarakhand, executed by THDC India Limited.
We know PSPs are essentially giant water batteries that use surplus renewable energy to pump water uphill. But what does the variable speed technology add? Why is it superior to conventional PSPs?
Well, conventional or fixed speed, PSPs operate optimally at only one rotational speed. This limits their flexibility. They can only absorb power or inject power in large predetermined blocks. This makes them less agile in reacting to sudden grid fluctuations caused by intermittent solar or wind energy surges.
So they're a bit clumsy.
In a way, yes. The variable speed technology changes that completely. It allows the machine to precisely control both the speed of pumping and the speed of generation. This means it can absorb or inject power instantly. adjusting its output based on real-time grid frequency changes. This capability significantly enhances the stability and resilience of the grid, making it a critical support system necessary for integrating India's ambitious clean energy transition roadmap. It's not just storage, it's smart, responsive storage.
That ability to react precisely to grid needs is absolutely key. And speaking of clean energy goals and supporting rural economies, we also saw the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MNRE, revise its guidelines for the biomass program. What regulatory barriers were they trying to overcome here?
The previous iteration of the biomass program was suffering from classic regulatory overload and overspecification. The complexity of the documentation, the multi-tier approval systems, along with high technical mandates like requiring expensive SCADA systems, all of it actively discouraged MSMEs and small biomass entrepreneurs from participating effectively. The compliance costs were just too high.
So what's the new approach?
The revised MNRE guidelines represent a much more pragmatic shift. They simplify processes and, critically, they link capital financial assistance, the CFA, directly to performance metrics rather than complex infrastructure mandates. For instance, pellet plants now receive a subsidy of 9 lakh per MTPH of capacity, incentivizing output over just compliance paperwork.
And what is the dual impact of this simplification on the economy and on climate goals?
The impact is profound in 2 areas. Economically, it strengthens the rural circular economy by promoting waste-to-wealth conversion. It utilizes agricultural stubble and waste that might otherwise just be burned. This process, converting waste into biobriquettes or pellets, creates about 10 to 15 direct jobs per megawatt hour of installed capacity in these rural units.
And the environmental benefit.
Environmentally, the data is very compelling. Enhanced biomass usage directly supports our climate goals by displacing fossil fuel consumption. Estimates show that 1 milliW of biomass utilization saves approximately 1,000 tons of KRO per year. This contributes significantly to India's targets under the Paris Agreement by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and, of course, controlling stubble burning.
That shift from a mandatory compliance burden to performance-linked incentives seems like a highly pragmatic governance approach to achieve both climate and economic goals simultaneously, linking rural jobs directly to decarbonization. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We began with the profound democratic legacy and constitutional safeguards derived from J.P. Narayan's Total Revolution. We analyzed the critical challenges to digital electoral integrity through the RUPP's crisis and the transformative implications of the 16th digital census. We looked at the volatility in West Asian security and the strategic push toward next-gen energy storage with the variable speed PSP.
If we synthesize all these areas, a very clear thread emerges. It connects these seemingly disparate topics from tackling opaque RUPPs to executing a digital census. And that thread is the fundamental and growing need for reliable, transparent, and high-quality data.
Interesting. So data is the link.
I think so. The democratic regeneration that JP envisioned, which relied on grassroots accountability and ethical governance, now hinges entirely on the quality and integrity of the information that underpins our entire system. Whether we are trying to manage the financial opacity of 2,800 unrecognized political parties or deliver accurate social services based on the immense volume of data from Aadhaar, our modern digital democracy relies on high-quality data for evidence-based governance, for precise targeting of schemes, and for maintaining crucial public trust. The data integrity crisis of the RUPPs shows what happens when information is opaque. The census shows the potential when data is comprehensive.
That synthesis is powerful. Data integrity really is the new foundation of accountability. Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive, something that connects that historical legacy to the future of Indian politics. If the new digital census, with its comprehensive caste enumeration data, truly becomes the definitive foundation for political delimitation post-2026, and we finally move decisively away from the 1971 base, how fundamentally will this shift power, not just between states, but between social groups? And what new form of comprehensive social, infrastructural, and economic planning will this massive, detailed data release necessitate across all state and central government functions? Something to think about as you continue your journey.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the only place where we take that colossal stack of sources you've sent us, the high-level policy docs, the local disaster reports, the security dossiers, and really just distill them.
Right, into that pure structural insight you need to understand the forces shaping modern India.
Exactly. If part 1 was about setting the global financial and political compass, today we are zooming in. We're going hard on the foundational pressure points within the country itself.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today, learner, is really structured around contrast.
We are linking the highly technical with the everyday observable reality.
So we're going from, what, pre-monsoon readiness failures?
Yes, the things that affect every metropolitan citizen, that sinking city problem, all the way to the high-stakes geopolitical necessity of, rapidly building strategic infrastructure in the Himalayas.
And then we're wrapping up with the quiet revolution in governance, the one fueled by AI and digital architecture. Our goal here is to extract the core systemic failures and, I think more importantly, the systemic solutions that are embedded within the current news cycle.
And we're linking those static syllabus concepts, geography, disaster management, governance, scientific innovation, directly to the current events that are forcing these policy shifts.
We want you to see the headlines not as, isolated incidents, but as symptoms of much deeper structural issues.
And we're starting with a topic that really defines the monsoon season. It affects hundreds of millions of people right now. I'm talking about the failure of urban water systems.
Okay, this is prime GS Paper 1 territory, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It integrates urban geography and disaster management, and it really exposes how 19th century engineering is just failing a 21st century climate reality.
Okay, so let's unpack this structural failure. We see the dramatic images every single year. Residents wading knee-deep through polluted water in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bengaluru.
Every single year.
The sources all point to a core historical failure, but it's paired with this unchecked modern growth. Can you give us the details of this severe infrastructural dysfunctionality?
The dysfunctionality, it's rooted in this severe, almost comical mismatch.
The mismatch between what?
Between historical infrastructure capacity and modern weather intensity. Let's take the classic example, Mumbai. The stormwater drains there, which are the backbone of the city's ability to handle heavy rain, they were mostly laid down during the British Raj.
So we're talking 1860s.
We're talking the 1860s. And critically, those systems, a century and a half old, were designed to handle a maximum flow of just 25 millimeters per hour of rainfall.
25 millimeters per hour. That's, to put that in perspective, that's based on a climate reality that just doesn't exist anymore.
Precisely. That was the standard based on the precipitation patterns and, the hydraulic understanding of the mid-19th century.
And today?
Today, because of localized climate shifts and increased storm intensity, Mumbai frequently experiences these cloudburst-like events. They often exceed 70 or even 100 millimeters per hour.
So that infrastructure is guaranteed to be overwhelmed.
Guaranteed. Within the first hour of a heavy downpour. The failure isn't an anomaly, it's a design feature. It's baked right into the system's DNA.
And this isn't just a legacy problem in major coastal hubs, is it? The scale of the crisis suggests that most modern urban expansion hasn't even bothered to address this fundamental deficit.
Absolutely. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, MoUA, their data reveals a staggering figure that should alarm every single planner.
Okay.
Over 70% of urban areas across India lack scientifically planned stormwater drains altogether.
70%?
Yes. This isn't just about inadequacy. In vast swaths of new urban development, functional integrated drainage systems either don't exist or they were built using these ad hoc, unscientific methods that just prioritize cost over capacity.
So, if the ancient drains are undersized and the new drains are, in many cases, non-existent, what are the man-made issues? The anthropogenic drivers that turn a heavy shower into a full-blown disaster. Because climate change is one factor, but our own planning errors are clearly the accelerant here.
Right. The primary anthropogenic drivers, they revolve around completely compromising the city's natural ability to absorb and manage water. We often call this turning off the natural sponge mechanisms.
The sponge mechanism, okay.
The trend of unplanned urbanization and the massive scale of concretization, it means that when rain falls, the ground permeability is severely reduced.
So you're basically covering a giant sponge with concrete and asphalt.
That's the perfect analogy. The water just runs off immediately instead of sinking in. The natural pathways for the water are destroyed.
They're gone.
Exactly. And look at the loss of natural water bodies and wetlands. In Mumbai, the rate of loss is alarming. The city has lost 80% of its natural water bodies, lakes, tanks, mangroves, over the last 40 years.
80%.
Encroachment. Filling them up for construction. These areas are nature's designated floodplains and retention ponds. When they're gone, the water has absolutely no choice but to use the streets.
An 80% loss of natural absorption capacity is, Well, it's essentially a deliberate act of setting ourselves up for disaster.
And adding insult to injury is the poor design standard we continue to use, even in some new projects.
What do you mean?
Many drainage systems are still engineered for what's called a 1 in 2 year storm event. It's a very basic standard.
But with climate change, a 1 in 5 year storm is happening almost every year now.
Precisely. So those basic infrastructure designs, they fail almost immediately under modern storm intensities. It is an engineering standard that is just no longer fit for purpose.
And maintenance, I would imagine, becomes a nightmare. The physical access points are often just covered up.
Yes, exactly. Unauthorized construction often covers up existing drainage lines, making maintenance and routine desilting activities extremely difficult, if not impossible.
So you can't even get the equipment in.
You can't. And if you can't get the desilting equipment in, the drains clog with silt and municipal solid waste, reducing their already limited capacity even further. And then there's the cross-contamination problem.
Cross-contamination.
Especially in cities like Patna and Bhopal. You get sewage infiltration that clogs the systems because there's a severe lack of separation between sewage lines and rainwater drainage lines.
Oh, so it's all one big mess.
It's an integrated mess of wastewater and storm flow, which exacerbates flooding and public health crises at the same time.
That structural critique leads us perfectly into the solution side of things, linking this crisis to the core static concepts of integrated urban water management, or IUWM. What are the policy shifts trying to reverse this?
The shift is happening conceptually at the highest policy level. The Manual on Stormwater Drainage Systems, published in 2019, is a key document here. It explicitly recommends much higher design standards.
Higher standards how?
It's pushing for return periods of 1 in 5 or even 1 in 10 years for new infrastructure planning. This acknowledges the new climate reality and the need for much higher resilience.
So planners are now legally mandated to consider these much heavier, less frequent, but increasingly common storm events.
Exactly. And government schemes are attempting to back this shift financially and structurally. AMRU 2.0 is central here.
That's the ADL mission for rejuvenation and urban transformation.
Correct. It specifically mandates the creation of integrated stormwater networks and calls for harvesting capabilities around clean water bodies. It's moving beyond just a simple focus on sewage and water supply.
And AMRUPP works alongside the Amrit Sarovar mission, right, which is focused on natural water retention.
Right. The Amrit Sarovar mission is all about the rejuvenation and development of urban water bodies. This directly enhances the natural stormwater retention capacity of cities. This is the green infrastructure side of the sponge city concept, using natural features to soak up excess water.
There are also legislative tools, I believe?
Yes, like the Model Building Bylaws of 2016. The MBBL made rainwater harvesting compulsory for any new plot over 100 square meters. The overall focus is shifting. It's about managing the water where it falls, not just trying to pump it away quickly and expensively.
It's a necessary paradigm shift. If we can't stop the rain, we have to adapt the land to manage it. But before we move on from disaster management, we have to talk about the related hazard that's becoming more frequent and deadly in our mountain regions: cloudburst risk.
Yes. Cloudbursts are extreme. They are short-duration, highly localized rainfall events that dump an immense volume of water, typically over 100 millimeters per hour in a very small area.
And when this happens in a fragile ecosystem like the Himalayas?
The destruction is immediate and complex. The major impacts on the environment are severe soil erosion, which strips away the topsoil needed for vegetation, and the destabilization of riverbanks and hillsides. This leads to devastating landslides and flash floods.
And this erosion has serious downstream consequences well beyond the immediate damage zone.
Absolutely. It greatly increases the sediment load in rivers. High sediment loads choke river channels, destroying aquatic habitats, and they pose a major engineering risk by reducing the operational lifespan and safety of downstream dams and hydroelectric projects because of rapid siltation.
And I assume the urban waste problem gets magnified.
Horribly magnified. Cloudbursts lead to the violent dispersion of waste from unregulated urban areas and dumping sites directly into rivers and surrounding ecosystems. It severely degrades water quality across the entire watershed.
So what's the official framework for managing such unpredictable, high-intensity events?
The National Disaster Management Authority, the NDMA, has specific cloudburst management guidelines from back in 2010.
And they go beyond just simple flood response.
Oh, yes. They focus critically on implementing very localized, robust early warning systems. This often requires dense networks of Doppler radars and automatic weather stations. They also focus on mapping out specific risk zones based on topography and geology and conducting targeted community awareness programs.
Focused on evacuation, I imagine.
Rapid evacuation procedures, yes, because the lead time for cloudbursts is absolutely minimal. This linkage between urban drainage failure, climate change, and cloudburst response. It shows that disaster management is inherently, inextricably linked to proper spatial planning, infrastructure maintenance, and scientific forecasting.
That sets a pretty sobering context for our domestic structural challenges. Now let's pivot sharply. We're moving from localized urban nightmares to high-stakes strategic necessities. We are seeing a major multi-billion-dollar infrastructure push in Jammu and Kashmir.
That's right. The central government recently sanctioned 19 major infrastructure projects worth over 10,600 crore rupees.
And this isn't just about local development, is it? This is a clear mobility mandate tied directly to national security and hard deterrence.
This investment is fundamentally strategic. The projects are focused entirely on ensuring year-round, reliable connectivity in high-altitude, border-proximate regions.
Mobility is resilience.
In modern warfare and security planning, yes, mobility is resilience. If troops and supplies can't move freely 365 days a year, the line of defense is compromised. The investment is concentrated in 4 key projects that illustrate this necessity perfectly.
Let's look at the first 2 tunnels then, the Pure Kigali and the Sadhana. These seem to be the most critical for all-weather access into sensitive zones.
First, you have the Pure Kigali Tunnel. This roughly 9-kilometer project on the historic Mughal Road, connecting Poonch to Shopian.
An ancient road, but often closed in winter.
Exactly. Its purpose is vital. It guarantees all-weather connectivity. It serves as a much-needed alternate access route into Kashmir, bypassing potentially vulnerable or congested primary highways.
So it's good for the local economy, for tourism, but the primary value is strategic.
Its primary strategic value is rapid military mobility, especially when the main National Highway 44 might be blocked or targeted.
And the second tunnel, Sadhana, that directly addresses proximity to the line of control, which is the definition of a high-stakes zone.
That would be the Sadhana Tunnel, spanning about 7 kilometers. This project connects Kupwara directly to the sensitive border area of Karna. Its significance cannot be overstated, particularly for troop and civilian safety.
So this keeps forward posts supplied no matter the weather.
It ensures round-the-year access, specifically for the swift movement of troops and supplies, and for civilian connectivity that is frequently severed by extremely heavy snow closures near the line of control, or LOSI, during severe winter months. It literally keeps communities connected and the forward military position supplied.
Beyond the tunnels, we also see key road projects that enhance the depth and redundancy of these valley-to-border linkages.
Exactly. We have the Zasnar-Shopian Road, 28 kilometers, and the Tregum-Chemkot Road, which runs 68 kilometers near Teetwal. These are not just local roads, they're arteries.
They enhance the linkages and reduce reliance on NH44.
Critically, yes. This systematic upgrade provides logistical redundancy, and it significantly improves the response time across the entire security matrix. It allows forces to be deployed or repositioned quickly in response to threats.
And this is where we connect mapping and geography directly to international relations. This massive infrastructure push isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a strategic investment that directly addresses a perpetually hostile geopolitical backdrop.
It is a clear and direct strategic response to the continuous dual security challenges India faces.
Let's start with the first one.
First, there is Pakistan's entrenched proxy war strategy. This is typified by the doctrine of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts, the use of non-state actors, militants, and continuous low-intensity conflict to drain India's resources and internal stability.
And the sources reference specific events, don't they?
They do. The Pahalgam 2025 killings, Uri 2016, the 26/11 attacks. These are persistent examples of this state-sponsored use of non-state actors. Having reliable, redundant infrastructure, well, it complicates the movement of infiltrators and allows for rapid counterinsurgency responses.
And then there is the elephant in the high-altitude room whose posture dictates much of the necessity for this rapid development.
China. China's aggressive and expansionist posture, particularly seen through repeated line of actual control, or LAC, violations, and the militarization of the border, a dynamic that intensified significantly after Galwan. This necessitates this rapid upgrade of our deterrence capabilities.
So it's a balancing act.
It's a very difficult balancing act. India's strategic challenge here is preserving its democratic and civilizational values, upholding soft power engagement, while simultaneously being absolutely prepared to respond forcefully with credible deterrence. a hard response when faced with terrorism and border aggression.
So infrastructure in this context is not just a development tool that creates jobs, it's a component of hard power.
Precisely. If you cannot move your assets efficiently, your deterrence posture is weakened. Every kilometer of new all-weather road and every meter of high-altitude tunnel built adds to India's strategic depth and resilience along these sensitive borders. It changes the cost-benefit analysis for any adversarial action.
Moving from the hard infrastructure of strategic roads and tunnels to the digital infrastructure of democracy, let's explore how technology is fundamentally reshaping governance and trying to clean up our political processes.
Right. We need to examine two critical layers here: electoral finance integrity, which is often deeply opaque, and process efficiency.
Let's start with what the Election Commission of India, the ECI, has identified as a structural integrity crisis. It revolves around something called Registered Unrecognized Political Parties, or RUPPs.
This is a fascinating area because it exposes a major loophole that has been exploited for years.
And the ECI recently undertook a significant cleanup, right? They delisted 345 RUPPs that were physically untraceable and hadn't contested elections since 2019.
Which suggests these parties were less about democratic participation and more about, well, financial engineering. They were, in many cases, pure ghost entities, existing only on paper, a kind of shell corporation for political funding.
The scale is what gets me.
The sheer scale is startling. India has over 2,800 RUPPs as of 2025. This accounts for nearly 97% of all registered parties. Their number doubled just between 2010 and 2019. That clearly indicates a surge driven by motivations outside of genuine political competition.
And the primary motivation, as the sources clearly indicate, is exploiting tax laws. What's the specific loophole they're targeting?
That is the core loophole. It allows these entities to exist as conduits for black money. RUPPs exploit Section 13A of the Income Tax Act.
Section 13A, that's the one for tax exemptions.
That's the one. This provision allows registered political parties to claim tax exemptions on donations and income, even if they have zero actual electoral activity. They receive funds, claim them as tax-exempt donations, and then often funnel them out, legitimizing untraceable money flows.
Which means they are functionally funding black money operations, not actual electoral competition.
Exactly. And their funding opacity is alarming. Reports show that less than 5% of RUPPs even submitted the required donation reports between 2013 and 2016. The surge in registrations, especially just before and during election cycles, is strongly linked to these shady donation flows.
So the ECI's delisting action is a critical step.
It is. That, coupled with requiring verifiable physical presence and mandatory compliance with financial reporting standards, is a critical step in strengthening financial compliance and electoral integrity.
So on one hand, the ECI is fighting financial opacity with enforcement. On the other, technology is directly supporting clean, transparent processes. The ECI itself is deploying new digital tools.
Yes, we see clear technological pillars emerging to rebuild institutional trust. On the electoral process side, the ECI has implemented a crucial reform using the ES-ENET app.
ES-ENET, what does it do?
This system allows presiding officers to digitally log and transmit real-time voter turnout updates every 2 hours directly from the polling stations, and it's securely encrypted.
That drastically reduces the lag time and the potential for speculation or manipulation that comes with delayed manual data collation.
Precisely. By providing near-instantaneous verified data, it enhances transparency and strengthens public trust in the tabulation process. But the push for digitization goes right into the legislative chambers themselves through the National E-Vitan application, or NEVA.
NEVA is about paperless legislative functioning, a massive efficiency boost.
It makes the legislative process end-to-end paperless. It handles everything from uploading agendas and bills to publishing responses and member speeches. This alone is a huge step for environmental sustainability and speed. But crucially, NEVA is tightly integrated with Bhashini.
Bhashini, the National Language Translation Mission.
Yes, and this is where the technology truly addresses inclusion. It uses AI-powered translation.
Real-time translation.
Yes. It allows for real-time AI-powered translation of speeches and documents into multiple Indian languages. Think of the implications. What happens in the state assemblies or parliament is now immediately accessible to all citizens, regardless of their linguistic background.
That's a game changer for transparency.
It is. It bridges the language barriers that have traditionally excluded non-English or non-Hindi speakers from engaging directly with legislative proceedings. It ensures digital inclusion is linguistically accessible.
And this AI-driven, inclusive approach mirrors what we see in welfare delivery through the success of the direct benefit transfer system.
Absolutely. The digital systems are not just about elections or legislative efficiency. They are fundamental to welfare delivery and physical health. In the financial year 2024-25 alone, a staggering 5.47 lakh crore rupees was transferred via DBT to beneficiaries.
Covering over 330 government schemes, that magnitude is globally unprecedented.
And that level of volume relies completely on the underlying digital architecture Aadhaar for identity, UPI for payments, and the Jan-Thon bank accounts.
The JAM Trinity.
The combined power of the JAM Trinity. Aadhaar conducted over 27 billion authentications in FY 2024-25. UPI processed transactions worth 23.9 trillion rupees monthly. This architecture is essential because, critically, it plugs leakage.
How much leakage are we talking about?
Inaccurate, outdated, or duplicate data leads to an estimated 4 to 7% excess welfare spending annually. That is billions of rupees of fiscal leakage that we need to plug. High-quality, real-time data enables evidence-based governance and precise, AI-driven targeting of interventions. It ensures the aid reaches the intended recipient without delay or diversion.
Let's transition now into the high-tech structural hurdles facing India's economic future. We'll start with a topic that bridges clean energy, high technology, and complex international law: nuclear liability.
Yes, this is an area where our legal structure is actively blocking global investment.
So India has ambitious clean energy goals. We need nuclear power to meet them, but foreign suppliers are extremely reluctant to invest in our sector.
And that reluctance stems entirely from the ambiguities and departures from global norms found within the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act of 2010, the CLNDA.
The CLNDA was passed with the intent of ensuring victims of a nuclear accident get timely compensation. But the sources highlight that the problem isn't the core principle of liability, but two specific problematic clauses.
Exactly. These create unlimited risk for foreign companies. CLNDA establishes that the operators say Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL, is strictly and exclusively liable for nuclear damage, capped at 1,500 crore rupees. That part is standard under international law.
Okay, so where does it go wrong?
Section 17B and 46. They muddy the waters profoundly and create what suppliers call unlimited exposure.
Let's break down Section 17B first. That clause permits the operator to seek recourse from the supplier.
It does. Section 17B allows the operator to sue the supplier if the accident was due to faulty equipment, latent defects, or if it was explicitly stated in the contract. This is a partial departure from international conventions, but it's somewhat manageable if clearly defined.
But Section 46 is the real killer. This is the one that guarantees foreign suppliers won't touch major projects here. Can you explain that unlimited risk?
Section 46 is the ultimate deterrent because it states that the provisions of the CLNDA do not affect the right of any person to pursue additional civil or criminal proceedings under other laws.
Other laws like tort law.
Exactly. Common laws like tort law. This means that even if the operator pays the mandated statutory compensation, a judge, years later, could still use a common law tort ruling to hold the supplier liable for virtually unlimited damages.
Wait, so even if the operator pays the mandated 1,500 crore, a judge could still use a common law tort ruling to essentially bankrupt the foreign supplier years later. That's the unlimited, uninsurable risk.
That is precisely the fear. And it fundamentally diverges from the global standard, the International Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Convention, the CSC model, which aims to channel liability exclusively to the operator and prevent these tort claims against suppliers.
So what's the real-world economic consequence of this legal uncertainty?
The consequence is project stagnation and a huge trust deficit. Major projects like the Jayaprakash project, planned with France's EDF, and the Kovada project, proposed with the U.S., both stalled explicitly due to these supplier liability fears.
What about the projects that are operational?
The only operational foreign partnership, the Russia-backed Kudankulam nuclear plant, essentially operates under a special intergovernmental agreement that sidesteps the CLNDA issues because it dates back to before the 2010 Act. This lack of legal certainty has severely hampered India's credibility as a reliable nuclear partner.
So how does India solve this and open up the sector, especially as we look toward integrating cutting-edge technology like small modular reactors or SMRs?
The path forward is unambiguous: legislative amendment. India has to amend the CLNDA to clearly define and restrict the scope of Sections 17B and 46, aligning fully with the CSC model to provide that necessary legal shield.
And there's a push to amend the Atomic Energy Act, too.
Simultaneously, yes, to allow greater private participation in SMR development. The government is backing this with a proposed 20,000 crore rupee investment in SMR development mentioned in the recent budget proposals. But without legal certainty, the technological progress remains sidelined. The technology can't be deployed if the financial risk is unlimited.
That structural reform is necessary for the future, but let's talk about pure scientific breakthrough happening right now. We have two very interesting indigenous innovations, one in extreme microscopy and one in climate-resilient agriculture.
Right.
First, let's look at the cryo-electron microscopy enhancement using something called MAGIC.
MAGIC stands for magnetic isolation and concentration. To understand why it's a breakthrough, you have to understand the core technology it's improving, which is cryo-EM.
Which is vital for structural biology.
It determines the atomic level structure of large, flexible macromolecules like ribosomes, ion channels, viral proteins by freezing them extremely quickly in a thin layer of ice. This helps us design targeted drugs.
But the challenge lies in getting a high enough concentration of the molecule to image it properly. If the sample is too dilute, the signal-to-noise ratio is impossible.
Exactly. The sample needs to be relatively concentrated, which is often difficult for complex, naturally dilute biological systems found inside cells. MAGIC solves this concentration problem brilliantly.
How does it work?
It's a novel technique that involves attaching magnetic nanoparticles to the molecules of interest. The scientists can then use a magnetic field to quickly isolate and concentrate these target molecules.
So instead of spinning down huge volumes or waiting for evaporation, you're using magnetism to grab and concentrate the molecules you want to study.
Precisely. This innovation enhances the cryo-EM process, allowing scientists to analyze biological samples that are a phenomenal 100 times more dilute than was previously possible using standard techniques.
100 times, that's a huge leap.
It is. It makes previously impossible studies of dilute, complex biological systems, which are often the most physiologically relevant, suddenly feasible.
Now let's move to agriculture and climate resilience. There's a modified CRISPR tool developed at the Bose Institute in Kolkata. We hear about CRISPR gene editing, but this application uses it differently, right? It's not permanently changing the DNA.
Correct. This is a very smart innovation because it uses a modified version of the CRISPR tool not to cut or change the plant's DNA structure, which is gene editing, but purely as an epigenetic regulator.
So it's like a switch.
It acts as a highly specialized reversible switch that controls when certain genes are expressed.
And how does that switch mechanism conserve the plant's energy until it's actually needed?
It's stress activated. That's the genius part. The system uses a specific protein to hold back the CRISPR switch outside the plant's nucleus where the DNA is stored, so the switch remains inactive.
Yeah.
Only when the plant registers severe external stress like intense heat, drought, or a bacterial infection is that protein hold released.
And then the switch moves into the nucleus.
Right, and it selectively turns on helpful stress response genes only when the danger is acute.
Which genes are we talking about here?
They're activating genes already present in the plant genes, like CBP60G and SARD1, which trigger the plant's innate immunity response against bacteria, or NAC2 and HSFA6B, which help the plant handle severe heat stress.
So it's a very targeted, on-demand approach.
Exactly. It's brilliant for climate resilience because the plant saves significant energy by only deploying its defense mechanisms when it's genuinely in danger. It's a much safer, more sustainable approach compared to permanent genetic modification.
This sounds like a fundamental shift toward truly smart, responsive input management in agriculture, adapting to unpredictable weather without permanent alteration. Finally, let's wrap up the science section with a major milestone for indigenous technology commercialization: the full industrial transfer of ISRO's Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, the SSLV.
This is a gargantuan step for the private space ecosystem in India and for the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision. For the first time, ISRO is conducting a full transfer of technology, or TORTI, for the SSLV to an Indian industrial consortium.
That's the one led by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited and Larsen and Toubro.
Correct. HAL and L&T won the highly competitive bid for 511 crore rupees.
So the consortium isn't just manufacturing it under license for ISRO, they actually own the rocket design, its associated patents, and its commercial future.
Precisely. The consortium will now own the intellectual property, build, market, and operate the SSLV rocket independently for third-party commercial payloads.
And this move is facilitated by ISRO's commercial and regulatory arms?
Yes, New Space India Limited and InSpace. The goal is to fully transition this segment of the launch market to the private sector, targeting a production capability of 6 to 10 rockets per year.
And the commercial demand is certainly there, with the global proliferation of small satellite constellations.
Absolutely. The global market for launching satellites weighing 500 kilograms or less is booming. By handing over the SSLV, a versatile, cost-effective four-stage rocket to the private sector, ISRO reduces its own operational burden. It allows them to focus on heavier, more complex deep space missions. And crucially, this move accelerates the maturation of the entire private space ecosystem. It guarantees a high volume of indigenous high-tech manufacturing.
So let's bring this all together. We've covered everything from structural failures in cities to digital governance and high-stakes defense. The common thread seems to be this constant push and pull between old systems and new technology.
Absolutely. It's a journey from analog to digital, from colonial-era infrastructure to modern resilient systems.
We've had an incredibly rich deep dive. We started by confronting the deep structural failures of our 19th century urban drainage systems, which are literally sinking our cities and demanding a new planning paradigm.
A resilient one.
Right. Then we moved to the strategic geography of the Kashmir tunnels, showing how physical mobility is directly tied to national security and hard deterrence. And we finished with the digital architecture of India.
From cleaning up political financing via the ECI to integrating AI translation with Bhashini and local governance, and building high-tech, climate-resilient infrastructure like that variable speed pump storage plant.
The constant thread woven throughout all these sources is India's profound struggle. It's a struggle to replace analog, colonial-era infrastructure and legal governance models with modern digital and technological standards.
We see it everywhere. Whether it's the lack of legal clarity and nuclear liability blocking billions in investment, or the 1860s pipe networks being overwhelmed by 21st century storms, the structural limitations are pervasive.
Yet, at the same time, we see the political will and the technological capability through tools like ES-ENET and the SSLV privatization to leapfrog these limitations.
We do.
So what does this all mean for the future of governance and resilience, learner? What stands out to you?
Today, we saw these technological successes. Right, the ECI's real-time voter turnout updates, the Ministry of Agriculture's new platforms using crowdsourced photos and AI for crop monitoring. We have data collection happening with unprecedented speed and accuracy.
Okay, so here's the final thought.
The key question for you to mull over is this. Considering the speed at which India's digital infrastructure is maturing, using systems like NEVA, BSSNI, and these AI-driven data analytics, how might the government completely overhaul the outdated century-old physical city planning and disaster preparedness mandates? What specific structural resistance, beyond just the obvious funding shortage, must be overcome for technology to finally replace bureaucratic inertia and truly realize that vision of a climate-resilient future? What happens when digital efficiency meets analog resistance?
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to set aside, the usual geopolitical turbulence and the flash-in-the-pan headlines.
Right.
We're going to look at something far more foundational, the actual architecture of the Indian economy itself.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. We're moving beyond those raw GDP growth figures, the headline numbers everyone loves to cheer for, to really examine the structural integrity underneath it all.
That's a crucial distinction to make.
It is. Specifically, we're dissecting three critical mechanisms. First, the quality of the capital that's funding India's long-term future.
Okay.
Second, the legal rules that are supposed to keep the market fair and competitive for everyone.
A double playing field.
And third, how our specialized banking sector is handling its really critical social mandate for inclusion.
And that structural health, it often gets overshadowed by short-term momentum.
All
So the mission today is to focus squarely on these three dynamic pillars: investment quality, market competition oversight, and financial inclusion policy. We've synthesized a stack of critical reports, particularly recent updates from the RBI and new regulatory notifications.
And what are they telling us?
Well, they collectively suggest that while the economic momentum is high, the stability of the funding, and fundamentally, who actually benefits from this growth, is under increasing, and I'd say urgent, scrutiny.
Absolutely. This isn't just about tweaking a few existing regulations. We're seeing data that points to some pretty significant structural concerns.
Like what?
Like surprising capital flight, for one. And that's combined with these major regulatory shifts in banking and market oversight that seem designed to counter those very concerns. We're really defining the long-term viability of India's economic model here.
And we're going to begin with what is, I think, the most counterintuitive finding of all.
Which is?
India's foreign investment climate. It's where we encounter what some are calling the FDI paradox.
The FDI paradox. Okay.
It's the uncomfortable truth that in today's hyper-globalized economy, simply having more money flow in doesn't automatically mean it's better money for long-term development.
Okay, let's unpack this with some foundational concepts first. In economics, we're constantly making a distinction between different types of capital.
We have to.
When we talk about generating robust, sustainable growth, foreign direct investment, or FDI, is almost universally seen as the gold standard of foreign capital.
It is.
Why is that distinction so important? What makes FDI inherently, as you said earlier, stickier than other financial flows?
The stickiness really comes from its nature. FDI, by definition, is long-term capital. It involves creating a lasting interest in an enterprise.
A lasting interest, so not just buying a few shares.
No, not at all. It means real ownership stakes, usually over 10%, and it's dedicated to building productive assets on the ground.
So give us an example.
Think of a German firm building a massive new automobile factory in Pune, or maybe an American tech company setting up a dedicated R&D center in Bengaluru, or even that patient long-term capital that funds a huge infrastructure project like a new port or a highway. This capital is literally anchored to the ground.
Yeah.
It can't just rush out overnight.
And the value here, it extends far beyond just the money itself, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because when this kind of FDI comes in, it's often tied to a major established global player.
Exactly. And that's what we call the non-financial benefit technology transfer. FDI is the main conduit for bringing in advanced R&D, cutting-edge machinery, modern managerial expertise, all the best practices that ultimately trickle down and boost the capacity of our domestic industry.
So if you want to jump several technological generations ahead, FDI is basically the fastest way to do it.
It's one of the most effective ways, for sure.
And it also plays a crucial role in stabilizing the macroeconomic picture. We often hear about economic vulnerability in the context of the balance of payments, the BOP. How does stable FDI help the BOP, especially when we almost always have a current account deficit, a CAD?
Well, that distinction, non-volatile, that's the bedrock of macroeconomic stability. FDI flows into the capital account of the BOP.
Okay.
And it's considered non-volatile capital precisely because it's difficult and slow to liquidate a factory or an R&D lab.
You can't just sell a factory with a mouse click.
Not quite. And this is in sharp contrast to something like foreign portfolio investment, or FPI.
Which is what exactly?
That's the highly liquid stuff. Think buying and selling stocks and bonds on the market.
Hot money.
Very hot money. It can rush out at the first sign of global instability or, domestic political jitters. And if FPI leaves abruptly, it puts huge pressure on our currency.
And the central bank has to step in.
The RBI has to expend its foreign reserves to plug the gap, which often just makes the CAD worse. The stability from FDI makes the whole economy more resilient to these global shocks.
So the policy goal is always to attract that stable, high-quality FDI, the kind that creates productive, lasting assets.
That's the dream, yes.
Which makes the recent findings from the RBI's 2024-25 report pretty concerning. Because if FDI is that foundational rock, this data suggests the foundation isn't being built up nearly fast enough.
That's a good way to put it.
So what are the specific worrying findings that illustrate the so-called FDI paradox?
What's genuinely concerning is the trend over the medium term. We talk about this high growth, but the underlying data for FDI quality, it shows a real structural weakness.
How so?
The average annual growth in gross inflows, that's the total money coming in before anything leaves, it was sluggish. It was hovering at only 0.3% over the last 4 years.
0.3.
0.3%. For an economy that aspires to be a global manufacturing hub and is reporting, 7% plus GDP growth?
Right.
Near stagnation in gross FDI inflows is it's a serious warning sign.
Only 0.3% average growth. That's essentially flatlining.
Yeah.
The crisis point, as you noted, is the net inflow.
Yes.
That's where the money leaving starts to catch up with the money arriving.
And that is where the structural concerns become undeniable. The report highlights that repatriation and disinvestments, so money being pulled out of India,
Right.
it surged dramatically at an annual rate of 18.9% post-pandemic.
18.9%.
Yes. And this isn't just investors finishing a cycle. This is rapid capital flight and divestment.
So just to be clear, we have stagnation in new money coming in, combined with a huge acceleration of old money leaving.
Precisely. And the consequence of that arithmetic is devastating for net capital formation.
Yeah.
The surge in repatriation has meant that India's net FDI inflow has effectively been cut in half,
Halved.
dropping substantially to just $29.6 billion.
Wow.
This suggests that capital flight and these underlying structural concerns about, say, return on investment or the ease of doing business are really overriding the short-term growth hype. It's leading to a much shallower pool of truly long-term productive investment.
This brings us squarely to the quality question then, and this issue of a distorted composition. When we see that $29.6 billion in net inflow, where is that money even coming from? And why does the source jurisdiction raise these red flags about its productivity?
This is a critical point. We have to look at the dominance of capital flows coming from jurisdictions like Singapore, which accounts for 15% of the total,
Okay.
and Mauritius, which contributes nearly 10%. Now, these are legitimate trading hubs, of course,
Sure.
but they're primarily favored as financial routing mechanisms.
Because of favorable tax treaties.
Exactly. Favorable double taxation avoidance agreements, DTAAs, and regulatory frameworks that just allow for easier capital movement.
So why does that matter? I mean, if the money ends up in India, why should we care about the route it took?
Because it obscures the true nature of the investment. A high volume of flows from these routing hubs suggests the investment might not be a genuine greenfield investment.
Which is a brand new factory built from scratch.
Right. It might be a brownfield investment, so just acquiring an existing company, or worse, it could just be portfolio money disguised as FDI to gain tax advantages or regulatory flexibility.
That's it.
This composition tends to mask the real decline in capital that's intended for manufacturing capacity building and technology transfer, which are tied to genuine country of origin investment.
And that structural weakness is visible in the specific sectoral data, isn't it? If the goal is industrialization, what's happened to FDI in manufacturing?
The share of FDI specifically dedicated to manufacturing has dropped, and it's dropped alarmingly. It's now sitting at only 12% of total flows,
Only 12%.
which is significantly down from the peak levels when India was seen as rapidly industrializing. If FDI is meant to build the country's industrial base, then a decline in this specific sector
The one that creates stable jobs and scales technology.
is a massive structural concern. It's one that policymakers simply cannot ignore.
To push that point even further, if we look at the comparison you drew, the contrast between money coming in versus money going out, the paradox really deepens. We have $29.6 billion net coming in.
Right.
Indian companies themselves are aggressively expanding abroad. The data shows a dramatic rise in Indian FDI outflows. They surged to $29.2 billion in 2024-25.
Almost tripling in 5 years.
Tripling. So the net effect is almost zero.
That comparison is key.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you could look at this outward investment as a sign of economic maturity.
How so?
Well, domestic firms have grown, they've accumulated capital, and now they're becoming global champions. They're seeking new markets, accessing global value chains.
Which is a good thing, a positive sign of ambition.
In a vacuum, yes. But wait, if our companies are investing $29 billion abroad, isn't that a sign of health, not failure? I mean, doesn't policy ideally want our firms to become global champions? How do we balance that global ambition against the immediate domestic need for capital?
That's the critical regulatory tightrope, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it signals maturity. But when outward investment nearly matches inward investment, the net impact on the domestic capital stock, the resources available for infrastructure, for job creation, for scaling up, it's minimal.
It's a wash.
It's nearly a wash. It signals that our domestic capacity is expanding abroad, possibly because the cost of capital or regulatory certainty or ease of doing business might be more favorable somewhere else.
Or they've just saturated the domestic market.
Or that.
Yeah.
But for a developing economy with our immense capital requirements, a near zero net inflow of productive capital should be setting off all the alarm bells.
So the implication then is that the current policy mix just isn't generating the kind of stable, high-quality capital we need to sustain a rapid industrial leap.
Precisely. Policymakers have to pivot. We need a concerted effort toward reform-driven, high-quality FDI attraction. We need to move beyond the headline gross numbers and really focus on the sectoral quality and the net retention rate of that capital to sustain true economic resilience.
And we are seeing some specific policy examples trying to respond directly to this structural weakness, right? Aimed at reversing that decline in manufacturing FDI. Can you detail the new electric passenger vehicle manufacturing scheme?
Yes, this scheme is a textbook example of a targeted policy response. It's designed to overcome the FDI paradox in a crucial future-facing sector.
Electric vehicles.
Exactly. It's explicitly designed to attract high-quality, high-tech foreign EV manufacturers. It offers a combination of tax benefits and investment-linked incentives.
But there's a catch.
There's a crucial caveat. The incentives are tied to a minimum investment threshold and a commitment to start manufacturing within a specific time frame.
So this isn't just a tax break for importing cars.
Not at all. It's demanding a genuine greenfield manufacturing commitment.
So it addresses that quality issue head on. It's basically saying, we don't just want your money, we want your factories, your supply chains, and your tech transfer.
That's the pivot. By offering time-bound incentives linked directly to productive assets, the government is trying to inject long-term high-tech capital into the core manufacturing sectors where we desperately need to build capacity and upgrade our technological base.
Directly countering those low-quality financialized flows we were just talking about.
That's the hope. The success or failure of schemes like this will be a key indicator of whether India can reverse this current trend of capital flight and sluggish growth in genuine industrial investment.
Okay, let's move from how foreign money behaves to how our own domestic giants play the game. We're turning our attention to market competition. In any fast-growing economy, you need regulation to make sure the playing field is level for everyone, right? From the massive conglomerates all the way down to the nimble startups.
Absolutely essential.
So let's focus on one of the most aggressive anti-competitive tactics there is, predatory pricing. What is it, and what makes it so corrosive to the health of a market?
Predatory pricing is an aggressive and, I should say, anti-competitive strategy. It's usually employed by a dominant firm, or at least a firm with very, very deep pockets.
And what do they do?
The firm intentionally sets its prices artificially low. We're often talking drastically below the actual average cost of production.
Okay, and there's one goal.
One strategic goal: to eliminate weaker competitors who simply cannot sustain those kinds of financial losses. It's basically economic warfare.
It sounds like a temporary inconvenience for the dominant player who can just absorb losses for a while, but it's a death sentence for the rivals who are running on much thinner margins.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
But why should the consumer care? I mean, initially you benefit from these artificially low prices.
The danger is systemic and it's long-term. In the short term, yes, the consumer gets cheap goods or services. But once those rivals are successfully eliminated or just driven out of business by this sustained price war,
The game changes.
the game completely changes. The surviving dominant firm achieves a monopoly or a near monopoly, and at that point they have unchecked power.
And they can and will raise prices.
They will raise prices arbitrarily, far above competitive rates. They'll cut quality, reduce customer service, and I think most damagingly, they stifle future innovation.
Why is that?
Because there's no competitive pressure left to force them to improve. It turns that short-term consumer gain into a long-term economic jail sentence.
And that's why we have robust competition law. How is India's legal framework designed to define and prohibit this kind of behavior?
The foundation here is the Competition Act of 2002. This legislation is designed to prevent practices that have what they call an appreciable adverse effect on competition in India.
And it specifically calls out this kind of thing.
It does. Crucially, it defines and prohibits the abuse of dominant position. And predatory pricing is recognized as a key explicit manifestation of this abuse.
And the body that enforces this is the CCI.
The Competition Commission of India, yes. They're the statutory body tasked with monitoring the market and prosecuting violations.
But proving abuse of dominance, and especially proving predatory intent, that has to be notoriously difficult in court.
It is.
How do you prove that a dominant player is intentionally selling below cost with the goal of destroying competition and not just, say, being more efficient?
That's the core regulatory challenge. Traditionally, regulators have really struggled with subjective standards. It's so easy for a large company to claim, oh, we were just running a temporary promotion, or we found a new cost efficiency.
All right.
This is why the CCI has recently decided to ramp up its muscle. It's introduced a very technical but very objective yardstick.
What specific recent action have they taken to introduce this new objective standard?
The CCI recently notified the Determination of Cost of Production Regulations 2025. This marks a very important technical shift, but it's a revolutionary shift in how they monitor and tackle the definition of selling below cost.
Okay, walk us through the technical shift here. You mentioned the introduction of ATC-based cost norms.
Hmm.
For the listener who hasn't practiced competition law, why is defining the average total cost a superior legal standard compared to what they might have used before?
Well, historically, courts and regulators often argued over whether the dominant firm sold below its average variable cost AVC or its marginal cost.
And what are those?
Variable costs are things like raw materials and direct labor costs that fluctuate with your output. Marginal cost is just the cost of producing one extra unit. Both of these are pretty low thresholds.
Okay.
A firm can often sell below its AVC or its marginal cost temporarily and just claim they were trying to cover their fixed costs, like rent or machinery.
So it's easy to wiggle out of.
Exactly. But this new regulation introduces the average total cost, ATC calculation, as the benchmark. Total cost includes all costs, both the variable costs and the fixed costs, amortized over the production volume.
Ah, I see.
If a dominant firm sells below its average total cost for a sustained period, it is essentially proving that they are losing money on every single unit they sell, regardless of fixed cost recovery.
So that moves the compliance challenge from a subjective argument about promotional periods to a measurable accounting metric.
Something much harder to disguise.
Right. If a company is demonstrably losing money on every unit over time, the only logical intent left is predatory elimination.
That's the regulatory genius of this move. By defining a clear, objective cost norm like ATC, the CCI dramatically enhances its ability to prosecute violations. It forces firms to justify their sustained pricing policies against a much higher legally defined threshold.
And that reduces the legal ambiguity that dominant firms love to exploit.
It significantly reduces it, yes.
Can you give us a real-world Indian example of this? Something that shows how quickly competitive tactics can turn predatory.
We can look at the classic case of NSE versus MCX in the stock exchange services market. The source material references how one major exchange, NSE, used extremely low-cost or even zero-cost tactics for trading services right when a rival, MCX, entered that segment.
And the intent was what?
The intent was clearly to leverage its dominance in other market segments to undercut and prevent the rival from even establishing a foothold. While the specifics of the cost calculation were debated back then, it perfectly illustrates how quickly competitive maneuvering can cross the line.
Even in sophisticated financial services.
Especially there. It shows how price can be used not as a means of efficiency, but as a weapon of market destruction.
This really highlights the urgency of the new ATC regulation. Why is this so timely now, especially when you consider the rapid evolution of the digital economy? It feels like the stakes are higher than ever before.
The stakes are exponentially higher, precisely because of digital economics. The digital economy has supercharged the speed at which market dominance can be achieved and abused. Think of the digital service giants, the e-commerce platforms, the payment platforms. They often operate on a global scale. They're funded by vast reserves of venture capital or global profits.
So they can afford to lose money for a long time.
They can finance massive, multi-year price wars, offering services for free or near zero cost, aimed solely at acquiring market share and wiping out competitors.
Right. If a massive global e-commerce player decides to sell physical goods at a substantial loss indefinitely, no local startup, no matter how innovative, can possibly compete or survive long enough to reach scale.
That's the threat, using deep pockets to quickly gain dominance through these price wars. And the low marginal cost of digital services just complicates this further.
So what's the CCI's role here?
By defining a clear, objective cost norm through these ATC-based regulations, the CCI is ensuring that the rules of the game are technically robust enough to keep pace with modern market dynamics. It's strengthening consumer protection in this increasingly digital and, frankly, concentrated economy.
So this is the regulator flexing its technical muscle against the giants.
It is. It's a fascinating pivot. It tells the dominant players, your pricing strategy must now reflect actual auditable costs, not just your capacity for sustained loss.
All right, let's shift gears now to the social side of finance. Financial inclusion. In India, banking policies is never solely about maximizing shareholder profit. It's intrinsically tied to our national development goals.
Always has been.
We have to ensure that the benefits of credit and banking reach every corner of the country, especially those who have been traditionally excluded. And this brings us to a crucial mandatory mechanism, priority sector lending, or PSL.
PSL is perhaps one of the most powerful and unique policy tools that the RBI uses to enforce inclusive development. It's an indispensable mandate.
And it requires commercial banks to allocate a specific fixed portion of their total credit.
Adjusted net bank credit, yes.
Yeah.
It's not some voluntary portion, it's a legally mandated percentage.
And it goes to sectors that are deemed socially or economically important, but often get overlooked by purely commercial, profit-driven lenders. So we're talking about sectors that are maybe high risk or low margin, but they're vital for national equity.
Right. Think agriculture, micro-enterprises, education loans, credit for weaker sections of society.
It's capitalism with a mandated conscience.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It recognizes that purely market-driven lending will inevitably create these things called credit deserts.
Right.
PSL is designed to deliberately channel capital where it generates the highest social return, even if the financial return is lower or riskier. And within this framework, we have these specialized institutions that really embody this mission, small finance banks, or SFBs.
They were created specifically to target segments like microenterprises, small farmers, and informal sector workers, the people who desperately need access to formal banking but don't fit the criteria of the large commercial banks.
Their mandate was, and it remains, intensely social. And because of this core inclusion mission, SFBs were originally given a much higher priority sector lending target than traditional commercial banks.
And the ultimate goal of all this is pretty profound, isn't it? It's not just about transactions.
No, it's dual. The immediate goal is, of course, credit access. The long-term goal, however, is real poverty alleviation, breaking cycles of debt, and achieving true economic stability for vulnerable populations by bringing them into the formal financial fold.
About fostering inclusive development.
Exactly. By channeling capital where it matters most socioeconomically.
Now, we've seen a very significant and very recent regulatory adjustment regarding these specialized institutions. Given their critical mandate, what did the RBI just announce regarding SFBs?
The RBI took a major step. It detailed the reduction of the priority sector lending target for small finance banks.
A reduction?
Yes. The target, which was previously set at an ambitious and frankly pretty aggressive 75% of their adjusted net bank credit,
75%.
has been reduced down to 60%.
A full 15-point drop. That is a substantial recalibration of their mandated allocation. What was the rationale that the RBI provided for such a significant shift away from that original high inclusion mandate?
The stated rationale is very clear and I think very pragmatic. The reduction is intended to grant these SFBs enhanced lending flexibility and, critically, to improve their profitability.
Okay, so flexibility and profitability.
Regulators observe that when you mandate banks to push 3/4 of their credit into specific, generally high-risk, low-margin sectors, it puts immense and really unsustainable strain on their balance sheet and their overall operational health.
This sounds like the RBI is implicitly saying that the moral mandate of 75% was maybe financially irresponsible or at least highly unsustainable. What data was so compelling that they dropped it a full 15 points?
We have to connect this policy adjustment to the broader microfinance context, which the source material mentions. The microfinance sector, while absolutely vital, faces some severe practical and systemic constraints.
Such as?
The source material notes that the full potential of microfinance is consistently hindered by issues like rapidly escalating credit quality erosion. So the risk of loan default is rising. Ethical breaches and collection methods when people are under pressure, and just systemic regulatory lapses.
So if an SFB is mandated to allocate 75% of its entire credit portfolio to these high-risk areas, like small, often uncollateralized loans to microenterprises or marginal farmers, they're being forced to lend into increasingly saturated or marginal markets just to meet the quota. That sounds like a recipe for credit quality erosion.
It is. The 75% target, while noble in its intent, it forced SFBs to prioritize compliance over prudent lending standards. It pressured them to lend aggressively in high-risk areas just to hit that regulatory target.
Which directly leads to the problems you just mentioned.
Directly. It led to the credit quality erosion and all the associated operational and ethical problems the industry has been observing. It creates a perverse incentive. Lend poorly to comply, or face regulatory penalties for non-compliance.
Let's analyze the trade-off here. On one hand, reducing the target risks, diluting the SFB's core inclusion mandate. I mean, they were created specifically to serve the excluded. But on the other hand, is this 60% level a pragmatic, necessary step toward ensuring these institutions actually have a sustainable, long-term business model?
It is the essence of regulatory calibration, is balancing equity with sustainability. The regulator recognized that if the institution itself collapses because of high non-performing assets or bad debt.
Stemming from an overly stringent mandate.
Right. If it collapses, its inclusion mission is permanently terminated. A financially fragile bank helps no one. The 60% adjustment is a calculated move to balance that inclusion objective with financial prudence.
So the message is, we want you to be deeply committed to inclusion, but we also want you to be healthy enough to do it for decades, not just for a few boom years.
Precisely. The regulator is ensuring that the delivery mechanism, the bank itself, has to remain viable and financially healthy to serve its social function effectively in the long run.
And 60% allows for that.
The 60% target allows the SFBs sufficient breathing room to diversify a portion of their lending into lower-risk, higher-margin areas, maybe slightly larger small business loans, or secured retail loans to maintain profitability and manage risk effectively.
While still serving a massive socially critical purpose.
Exactly. It highlights how regulators are constantly adjusting these mandatory lending requirements to ensure the sustainability of the inclusion mission, rather than just forcing temporary compliance. This pragmatic shift recognizes that financial inclusion is a marathon, not a sprint.
So we've navigated 3 complex but highly interconnected economic landscapes today.
A lot to cover.
A lot. We started with the FDI paradox, challenging that simple narrative of India's economic boom by looking at the stagnation in quality, productive foreign capital and the surge in repatriation.
Right.
We then analyzed the regulatory counterpunch against monopolies through that technical update tackling predatory pricing. And finally, we explored the dynamic tension between profitability and inclusion in the banking sector's social mandate.
And the key takeaways, I think, they really crystallize the structural challenges facing India's pursuit of stable, equitable growth. First, India's stability is challenged by 2 opposing forces in investment.
The push and the pull.
The surge in disinvestments on one side and a dependence on low-quality financialized capital flows on the other, which often bypass the productive manufacturing sectors.
And that necessitates a sharp policy pivot toward attracting genuine greenfield and high-tech investments.
Exactly, like the EV scheme we talked about.
Second takeaway. The proactive action of the Competition Commission of India is absolutely vital. The introduction of those ATC-based norms is a highly technical but critical regulatory move.
It's aimed at ensuring a fair market.
And this is particularly crucial now as digital giants leverage their global scale and their deep pockets to seek dominant market positions domestically, which threatens to stifle any nascent competition.
And third, the RBI's calculated move to reduce the PSL target for small finance banks from 75 down to 60% is an acknowledgement of reality.
It is.
It addresses the operational strain and the credit quality erosion that was being caused by those overly aggressive financial inclusion mandates. It prioritizes institutional flexibility and profitability to ensure the long-term viability of the microfinance system.
So what does this all mean for the future health of the economy? If India can successfully manage to attract stable, productive FDI by guaranteeing that level playing field and using competition law vigorously against predatory monopolies,
And at the same time,
and simultaneously ensures that the institutions driving financial inclusion, like the SFBs, are financially resilient, we won't just see high growth numbers. We'll see truly sustainable economic development.
one that benefits all segments of society.
Exactly.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over. We've seen India master domestic digital infrastructure like UPI. It's world-class in enabling mass inclusion and transaction volume.
It really is.
So the core question for the future is this. Can India leverage that domestic digital success and technology leadership to pull in genuinely productive, high-tech FDI that builds factories and R&D centers and thereby solves the FDI paradox?
Or will that same digital growth merely exacerbate the problem of concentrated market power and financial volatility, which the CCI is now racing to control?
The digital revolution cuts both ways. It accelerates both our potential and our systemic risks.
That's a powerful challenge to leave you with. The structure underneath the headlines is what truly defines economic destiny. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into India's economic architecture. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. So I want to start today with a bit of a puzzle for you. What connects, say, India's absolutely massive digital economy metrics, the geology of Iran's nuclear facilities, and a revolutionary new tool that helps plants fight heat waves?
It sounds like a strange collection of topics.
It does, but they're all linked. You have a financial system processing over 23 trillion rupees a month, a nuclear site buried 80 meters inside a mountain, and then a tiny biological switch.
And that triangulation, I think, really reveals the speed and the interconnectedness of all these modern policy challenges. We're not looking at isolated events anymore. We're dealing with, whole systems that are either adapting or in some cases failing to adapt to these huge shifts in technology and climate and security.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We've gone through a pretty dense stack of sources, everything from macro policy shifts in India to these escalating global security threats to infrastructure and even cutting-edge science. The goal isn't just to list the facts, but to give you a consolidated, context-rich way of understanding why all these details matter.
And if you had to pull out one theme that links, say, a discussion about urban flooding with the latest results in neutrino physics, it's really resilience. Resilience and innovation in the face of, well, a lot of uncertainty.
That's a great way to frame it.
Every single topic we're going to touch on shows a system. It could be a physical one, a digital one, or a biological one that's either trying to shore up its vulnerabilities or, in some cases, engineering totally new solutions just to survive.
Okay, so let's unpack that. I think we should start with what you could argue is the foundational layer of modern India, which is its vast digital infrastructure. Let's look at the sheer scale and the strategic use of that architecture first. When we talk about India's digital transformation, you almost have to start with the numbers because they are just, well, they're staggering.
They really are.
And they reflect this fundamental top-to-bottom shift away from these old analog processes, which were, often slow, opaque, sometimes corrupt, to the seamless digital delivery that kind of bypasses all of those old structures. The velocity of the change is really what's so striking. We're seeing global benchmarks being set here. Let's start with UPI, the Unified Payments Interface. It's so much more than just a convenient app on your phone. It's ranked as the world's largest real-time payment network.
And that number you mentioned, 23.9 trillion rupees a month.
Yeah.
It's a huge figure that needs context.
It really does.
To put that in perspective for you, that monthly volume often exceeds what major Western card networks handle globally in the same amount of time. It's become this instant liquidity engine for everything from big corporate deals down to, a street vendor selling vegetables.
And that level of speed, that transactional velocity, is only possible because there's this robust, unified, and verifiable identity system underneath it all.
That's where Aadhaar comes in.
Exactly.
And you have to think of it not as a card, but as this biometric-linked identity backbone that's available to almost everyone. And the numbers, they really bear this out. In the last fiscal year alone, FY 2024-25, there were over 27 billion authentications.
27 billion. Just to pause on that, that's like authenticating almost 4 times the entire global population in 1 year through one single system.
Precisely. It's the essential plumbing for every single identity-linked service, whether you're opening a bank account using eKYC.
Which itself saw 1.8 billion transactions.
Right? Radically cutting the cost of onboarding a new customer. Or if you're receiving welfare payments. Aadhaar provides that fundamental layer of trust. And it's all supported by this enormous user base, 1.2 billion mobile subscribers, 800 million internet users. That creates an economy of scale that's, well, it's virtually unmatched anywhere in the world.
And this convergence of identity, mobile, and payments is what enables the Direct Benefit Transfer System, or DBT, to be so incredibly efficient.
DBT just fundamentally changed the whole mechanic of how welfare is delivered. It gets rid of all those administrative layers that historically led to, frankly, massive leakage of funds.
Right. The middlemen.
The middlemen. So in the last fiscal year, 5.47 lakh crore was transferred directly into the bank accounts of beneficiaries across more than 330 government schemes. This is last mile delivery perfected. It cuts down on friction, on travel time, and critically, on the role of those who used to siphon off a cut.
Now, this level of inclusion and efficiency is often talked about as the main benefit, but you argue the deeper, maybe more strategic value is in creating this robust data ecosystem. So why does the quality of the data matter beyond just that immediate financial transfer?
Because it shifts the whole thing from being just an accounting tool to being a strategic governance tool. The fiscal health of the government really depends on it. Our sources are highlighting that excess welfare spending, what we'd call fiscal leakage, from, duplicate entries, inaccurate data, or ghost beneficiaries.
So people who don't exist.
People who don't exist, or one person getting the benefit twice. That linkage currently runs at about 4 to 7% annually.
So just to be clear, if the government is spending, say, $100 billion on welfare, we're talking about $4 to $7 billion just being wasted because of bad data.
Exactly. And so quality verified data that's linked through this Aadhaar DBT architecture gives you an immediate verifiable defense against that kind of waste. The savings from just closing that gap are enormous, and they directly improve the government's fiscal position.
I imagine the long-term goal for high-quality data goes well beyond just saving money on welfare, though.
Oh, absolutely. It's foundational for modernization. I mean, high-quality, real-time data is the prerequisite for what's called evidence-based governance, and it strengthens India's whole domestic AI ecosystem.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you have clean, longitudinal data on demographics, on consumption patterns, on how schemes are being taken up, then the AI models you build on that data can allow for incredibly precise targeting.
So you could, for example, optimize the logistics for food distribution.
Or predict a localized health crisis months before it happens.
Yeah.
You shift the whole model of governance from being reactive to being predictive.
That does introduce a really interesting dynamic. We often focus on the efficiency and the speed, but doesn't relying so heavily on a single identity platform like Aadhaar, with 27 billion authentications, introduce a massive single point of failure? I mean, shouldn't we be worried about data security and privacy?
That is a critical question, and it's one that demands constant regulatory attention. The system is, designed with multiple layers of encryption and localized biometric storage to prevent big database leaks. But the reliance on one single architecture means security, privacy, and the mechanisms for redressal have to be constantly robust.
Because if the public loses trust.
Exactly. As the sources note, citizens' trust in this kind of digital governance rests completely on the ability of public systems to deliver accurate, reliable, and secure services. If the money transfer is instant but the data is compromised, the whole edifice risks erosion. It's a perpetual trade-off between convenience and security.
It's the core challenge of any digital public infrastructure. It's fantastic when it works, but the vulnerability is consolidated. Now, this digital foundation also supports these broader quality of life improvements we see in the sources, like the rapid expansion of metro rail from just 5 cities to 23, or the 97% reduction in mobile data costs.
It's all interconnected. And that infrastructure discussion is a perfect pivot. Now that we've established this digital foundation, let's talk about the very physical threats that our major cities are facing, especially the ones being exposed by climate change.
The annual struggle of India's biggest cities during the monsoon has become, sadly, predictable, which brings us to the urban drainage crisis. We're talking about a structural problem that a lot of people tend to ignore until the next big flood hits the headlines.
Right.
According to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, or MOHUE, over 70% of urban areas in India lack scientifically planned stormwater drains. 70%. That's just an astonishing figure for a nation that's urbanizing so rapidly.
That figure really highlights a systemic failure to anticipate or adapt to urban growth, and, more importantly, to the intensity of modern climate events. To really grasp how severe this is, just look at the classic example, Mumbai.
Right.
Much of the core drainage infrastructure there was built in the 1860s.
The 1860s, so that's infrastructure that was designed when the Suez Canal was being dug, before electricity was even common.
Precisely. Those drains were engineered to handle rainfall of about 25 millimeters per hour. Today, because of localized climate change and these intensified monsoon systems, Mumbai frequently gets cloudbursts that dump over 100 millimeters per hour of rain.
So the infrastructure isn't just obsolete, it's functionally useless in a severe storm.
It's completely overwhelmed. It's a physical time capsule that's constantly being broken by modern weather.
And that history is being compounded by very modern mistakes.
Absolutely. The man-made issues are making the historical deficit even worse. Mumbai, for instance, has lost 80% of its natural water bodies over the last 40 years.
80%?
Yes. The lakes, the ponds, the mangroves. These things acted as natural sponges, as retention ponds. When you concretize those areas for construction, the water literally has nowhere to go but into those already overloaded 1860s-era street drains.
So you've got reduced ground permeability from just paving over everything, and then you have these poor engineering standards on top of it.
And those poor design standards are endemic. Our sources note that many municipal bodies still design their drainage for a mere 1- and 2-year storm event. That means if a storm with a 1- and 5-year intensity hits, the system immediately fails. It also shows a jurisdictional challenge. Often the city, the state, and central government schemes aren't coordinated on long-term water planning.
And then there's the really gross issue of contamination, the intersection of sewage and stormwater.
Yes, and that turns a drainage failure into a public health catastrophe. In major cities like Patna and Bhopal, the systems are often so integrated or just so poorly maintained that raw sewage infiltrates the stormwater lines.
When the drains fail.
When the drainage fails, you have streets filled with contaminated floodwater, and that immediately spreads waterborne diseases. The lack of separate lines for sewerage and drainage is a failure of the most basic civic infrastructure planning.
So what's being done? What policies are being put forward to try and break this cycle?
Well, the central government has pushed several initiatives. The Manual on Stormwater Drainage Systems from 2019 is crucial because it tries to force some future-proofing. It mandates that new infrastructure be designed for much higher return periods, like 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 years.
So the system has to be able to withstand a storm that statistically should only happen once every 5 or 10 years.
Exactly. It's a significant upgrade from the old standards.
And what about the role of AMR 2.0?
So the EDEL Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation 2.0, it mandates creating integrated stormwater networks and also protecting and rejuvenating urban water bodies. That ties into the Amrit Sarovar mission as well. On top of that, the Model Building Bylaws of 2016 make rainwater harvesting mandatory for any plot over 100 square meters. The message is clear. You have to handle runoff both above ground with better pipes and below ground with retention and harvesting.
Okay, so moving from water, our green energy transition is actually creating some new waste challenges. Let's look at managing new forms of waste, specifically solar waste.
This is a really critical preemptive policy move. India is rapidly scaling up its solar capacity to meet clean energy goals, which is great, but solar panels have a lifespan. It's about 25 to 30 years.
Right.
So the CPCB's draft guidelines for managing solar waste are a timely attempt to avoid what could be a looming environmental disaster when the first big generation of panels starts to reach its end of life.
What makes solar waste more complex or hazardous than, say, just general solid waste?
It's the composition. Solar panels contain critical and often hazardous elements: lead, cadmium, arsenic, gallium, tellurium. If these panels are just dumped in a landfill, these heavy metals can leach into the soil and the aquifer systems over time. Cadmium telluride, for example, can persist in the soil for decades. The environmental and health risk is very long-term.
So the CPCB playbook is trying to get ahead of that.
Exactly. It's trying to institutionalize scientific, safe, and inclusive recycling to promote a true circular economy in the energy sector.
And Delhi is pioneering a solution for the more general e-waste problem with this planned e-waste recycling eco-park.
That's right. It's slated for Holambi Kalan, and it's the first of its kind in India, a specialized, centralized facility for the scientific dismantling and recycling of electronic waste. The governance model here is really important. It's being operated on a DBFOT basis.
DBFOT. Break that down for us. Who takes the risk and who benefits?
So DBFOT stands for Design, Build, Finance, Operate, and Transfer. A private company is contracted to do all of those things for a set period, maybe 15 or 20 years. This leverages private sector efficiency and capital upfront. Crucially, the private partner bears most of the construction and operational risk.
And then at the end of the contract?
Ownership is transferred back to the government. The public benefits from having a modern scientific facility that prevents the often toxic practices of the informal recycling sector, where they're burning plastic and materials and releasing hazardous fumes.
Let's pivot from solid waste and sewage back to air quality, specifically Delhi's notorious winter pollution. They're running this cloud seeding experiment.
The Delhi Artificial Rain Project. It's a 3.21 crore pilot. And it's a very innovative attempt to use weather modification for basically an urban cleanup.
So a high-tech approach.
A very high-tech approach. The method is cloud seeding, and it's being done in collaboration with experts from IIT Kanpur and the India Meteorological Department. Now, historically, cloud seeding was mostly used for drought relief, trying to encourage existing clouds to produce rain.
But the goal here is completely different. It's pollution control.
Precisely. The aircraft disperses seeding agents, usually silver iodide and common rock salt, directly into nimbostratus clouds that have enough moisture. These tiny particles act as condensation nuclei. They encourage the microscopic water droplets in the cloud to bind together, grow heavy, and fall as rain.
And that rain then acts as a natural scrubber.
Exactly. It washes out the suspended particulate matter, the PM2.5 and PM10 pollutants, from the lower atmosphere. The pilot is targeting specific polluted corridors and tracking the air quality in real time to see just how effective this scrubbing action is.
It's a remarkable example of deploying sophisticated tech to solve a very local, very persistent environmental crisis. And that moves us perfectly from local resilience to the complexities of high-stakes global conflict. Let's jump into the nuclear domain.
The security situation in West Asia has escalated into a pretty frightening news cycle of direct engagement. This recent phase really began with Israel's strikes on key Iranian nuclear sites, what was dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer. They targeted facilities like Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan.
And the targets themselves speak volumes about the strategic priorities. Iran's response, Operation True Promise 3, was highly visible, with extensive missile strikes. It emphasized that direct confrontation is now clearly on the table. And this brings the risk of nuclear proliferation back into the sharpest possible focus.
So for policymakers, understanding the technical reality of uranium enrichment is just non-negotiable.
It really is. Walk us through that distinction between uranium for power and uranium for weapons. Okay, so the key is the fissile isotope, uranium-235. Natural uranium is mostly U-238, with only about 0.72% U-235. For a civilian nuclear power plant, you need what's called low-enriched uranium, or LEU. That's enriched to about 3 to 5% U-235.
And for weapon?
For a weapon, you need highly enriched uranium, HEU, which is 90% U-235. That's weapons-grade material.
And where is Iran in that process right now?
They are currently enriching uranium up to 60%, and this is highly alarming for two key reasons. First, 60% is far beyond anything required for any civilian purpose.
Okay.
And second, the physics of enrichment means that technical difficulty is not linear.
Explain that curve for us.
The hardest, slowest, and most energy-intensive part of the whole process is that initial jump, going from natural uranium up to about 5% LEU. Once you get past that, and especially once you get to 60%, the next steps to get to 90% become technically much, much easier and faster.
So this means Iran is very close to breakout capability.
Exactly. The time needed to get enough weapons-grade material for a bomb is measured in weeks or even days, not months. And the sites themselves, like Fordo, tell us a lot about their defensive posture. Fordo is buried 80 meters deep inside a mountain. It's designed to be functionally impervious to conventional airstrikes, even with bunker buster bombs.
Which signal a long-term strategic intent, not short-term compliance.
Precisely. This inherent risk has direct consequences for the global non-proliferation framework. Let's talk about the NPT and the threat of withdrawal.
The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, is the global gold standard for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. Amid this severe escalation, our sources are indicating that the Iranian parliament is actively preparing a bill that would trigger Iran's complete withdrawal from the NPT.
That would be a seismic event in global politics.
It would fundamentally upend decades of diplomatic efforts. A withdrawal signals that a state is prioritizing the unconstrained pursuit of nuclear weapons over any international treaty. However, we have to note the complexity here. India, Pakistan, and Israel, three de facto nuclear powers, are already non-signatories to the NPT.
Which complicates any unified global response.
It does, because the treaty's legitimacy is already contested by these key regional actors. And this leads us naturally to Israel's decades-old, intentionally ambiguous deterrent strategy, the Samson option.
The Samson option. Explain that for us.
It's Israel's undeclared nuclear doctrine. It's named after the biblical figure Samson, who, when he was captured, chose to destroy the Philistine temple, killing himself along with all of his enemies.
So the doctrine is a commitment to massive nuclear retaliation, but only in response to an existential threat.
Right. The potential annihilation of the Israeli state. It's primarily a psychological deterrent, a promise of ultimate reprisal, not a conventional military protocol.
And it relies on a policy of strategic ambiguity.
Absolutely. Israel neither confirms nor denies its possession of a nuclear arsenal, which is estimated to be somewhere between 80 and 400 warheads. This calculated uncertainty profoundly shapes the military calculus of its regional adversaries. It acts as a potent psychological firewall, raising the stakes of the current standoff with Iran to an almost unthinkable level.
Let's pull back from that flashpoint now and look at India's own domestic nuclear policy. India has ambitious clean energy targets, and that requires a massive expansion of nuclear capacity. But there's a major legal roadblock, the CLNDA of 2010.
The Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act. It was passed to make sure victims of any future nuclear accident would get swift and defined compensation. It makes the plant operator strictly liable with a capped financial liability of 1,500 crore.
But it was passed with some crucial ambiguities that have essentially frozen major foreign cooperation.
That's right. Projects needed to build these large-scale reactors have stalled. The core conflict is between two sections, Section 17B and Section 46.
Okay, so what do they say?
Section 17B allows the operator, the state-owned corporation, to seek compensation from the supplier if the damage was caused by the supplier's faulty equipment.
That sounds reasonable. If you sold me a faulty part that caused a disaster, you should share the liability.
In theory, yes. But Section 46 is the real problem. It states that the CLNDA doesn't prevent additional civil or criminal proceedings from being brought against anyone under any other existing law, namely tort law.
Wait, so a foreign supplier could fulfill their contract, the reactor could operate safely for a decade, but if an accident happens because of a latent defect, they could still be sued for unlimited damages under tort law.
Exactly. This regulatory conflict diverges sharply from the international standard, the Convention on Supplementary Compensation for Nuclear Damage, or CSC, which India aims to align with. The CSC typically channels all liability solely to the operator. This ambiguity has made foreign suppliers unwilling to take the risk, stalling crucial projects like Jayaprakash with France's EDF and Covada with U.S. companies.
That's a massive regulatory disincentive. What's the path forward to resolve this?
The solution has to be legislative. The government needs to amend the CLNDA to clearly define and restrict supplier liability, bringing it fully in line with the CSC. Another step is creating model insurance pools, where the government, operators, and suppliers all contribute to a shared risk pool to manage the financial exposure.
And briefly, I see mention of small modular reactors, or SMRs. Why are they part of the solution?
SMRs are smaller, advanced reactors, typically under 300 megawatts. They need less initial capital, they can be deployed faster, and they offer more flexibility than traditional gigawatt-scale reactors. They're seen as a way to quickly scale up clean energy capacity, even while the issues with the larger foreign-supplied projects are being sorted out.
Okay, shifting from securing energy to securing physical territory. Let's talk about the huge push in strengthening strategic borders. The government has sanctioned projects worth over 10,600 crore in Jammu and Kashmir.
And these projects address a critical vulnerability: all-weather connectivity. In these high-altitude border regions, winter snow often cuts off entire valleys, isolating both civilians and troops for months.
Two tunnels really stand out for their strategic value. Tell us about the Pir Ki Gali Tunnel.
The Pir Ki Gali Tunnel is a 9-kilometer-long tunnel on the historic Mughal Road. It provides an alternate, reliable route for troop mobility and logistics, bypassing treacherous high-altitude passes that are usually snowbound for 6 months of the year. And of course, it also massively improves civilian access and tourism.
And the Sadhana Tunnel, which is even closer to the line of control.
The Sadhana Tunnel is 7 kilometers long, connecting Kupwara to Karna. This one is specifically designed to ensure round-the-year access very near the low sea. This is vital not just for continuous troop movement and supply lines, but also for supporting the local populations, making sure essential services can reach them even in the worst winter conditions.
Moving from the Himalayas to the maritime domain, we've also seen advancements in coastal defense with the new Indian Coast Guard vessel.
That's the Adamya. It's the first fast patrol vessel, or FPV, built by Goa Shipyard Limited. And it's a crucial component of India's growing indigenous capability for maritime security.
What makes the Adamya a symbol of the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision in defense?
It's the level of indigenization, especially in its propulsion system. The Adamya is the first vessel in its class to integrate controllable pitch propellers, or CPPs, and fully indigenous gearboxes.
And CPPs are a significant technical leap.
They are. They allow for rapid changes in the vessel's speed and direction without needing to change the engine speed. This dramatically enhances maneuverability, fuel efficiency, and quick reaction capability, which is essential for coastal surveillance and interdiction operations.
That seamless transition of technology from a global defense imperative to a local maritime solution brings us perfectly to the micro-world of biology and high-energy physics. This section genuinely highlights innovation at its absolute peak, often as a direct response to the challenge of climate change. We have to start with this incredible breakthrough from the Bose Institute in Kolkata, a modified CRISPR tool for heat stress.
This has the potential to fundamentally revolutionize how we manage agricultural risk all over the world. The constant challenge for agriculture is that plants have to survive two major unpredictable threats: environmental stress, like heat waves, and sudden bacterial infections.
And the problem has always been that activating defenses takes a huge amount of energy.
Exactly. If a plant is constantly running its defense systems, even when there's no threat, it diverts energy away from growth, and that significantly lowers your crop yield. So what researchers needed was an intelligent energy-saving system.
And this modified CRISPR tool provides that intelligent system. They call it the switch. Walk us through the mechanism.
So the researchers engineered a non-cutting version of the CRISPR tool, known as dCas9. Unlike normal CRISPR, which cuts and edits DNA, dCas9 is purely a targeting and regulating device. It can activate or repress genes, but the brilliance is in the control mechanism. They identified a tomato protein, N8-CMTF3, that acts as the lock, or the governor.
So this protein holds the switch in an inactive state.
It does. It physically holds the dCas9 switch outside the plant's control center, the nucleus, where all the DNA resides. This keeps the defense systems dormant, and that saves precious energy. The NAC-MTF3 protein only releases the switch when the plant's cellular sensors detect the presence of high heat or a severe bacterial attack.
That is true environmental feedback control. So once it's released, the dCas9 switch enters the nucleus and knows exactly which genes to turn on.
Yes, through genetic programming. If it senses a bacterial infection, it'll selectively activate genes like CBP60G and SARD1, which start the immune response. If it senses high heat, it activates heat shock genes like NEC2 and HSFA6B. This precision ensures the plant only initiates a full defensive response when it is strictly necessary, making the crop far more resilient and energy efficient against these unpredictable weather patterns.
That's precision at the molecular level. And now moving to the field level, we have another innovative tool that uses machine intelligence. AI in crop monitoring, or SHUPPIC.
CROPIC stands for Collection of Real-Time Observations and Photo of Crops. It's a pilot initiative designed to use artificial intelligence and crowdsourced data to monitor crop health and streamline agricultural governance. It tackles one of the biggest logistical hurdles in agricultural insurance.
How does the farmer interact with this AI? What data are they collecting?
Farmers use the Triopic mobile app to upload geotagged photos of their fields and crops 4 or 5 times during the growth cycle. This provides constant, real-time, ground-level data. That data is then fed into an AI cloud engine that uses computer vision algorithms to accurately detect the crop type, track its growth stage, and most importantly, identify signs of stress, pests, or disease outbreaks.
And what does this seamless flow of verified data mean for policy, especially for insurance?
The key is its integration with the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the National Crop Insurance Scheme. Traditionally, loss assessment for insurance claims was slow, manual, and often prone to corruption or delays. It could take months. By using AI-analyzed, crowdsourced data, CRPAC drastically reduces the human dependency in that loss assessment process. This means faster, more accurate, and more transparent settlement of insurance claims, which significantly improves a farmer's resilience after they've had a loss.
Okay, let's make a pretty big switch now. From precision agriculture to the frontiers of fundamental science and the search for the universe's most elusive particles.
Starting with the neutrino mass measurement, we've seen a significant physics result that established a new upper limit on the sum of neutrino masses. This might sound obscure, but it's a quiet, profound discovery because it confirms what was long suspected. Neutrinos, those ghostly particles that barely interact with matter, actually have mass.
And why is that fact so important, particularly for the standard model of particle physics?
The Standard Model, which explains 3 of the 4 fundamental forces and all the known elementary particles, was built on the initial assumption that neutrinos were massless. Proving they have mass means the Standard Model is fundamentally incomplete. It forces us to search for new physics. And establishing this upper mass limit is crucial because it constrains the possibilities. It closes off theoretical models that predicted heavier neutrinos.
And you mentioned something about Majorana and direct neutrinos. Can you give us the high-level context on why that distinction matters so much?
It gets at a fundamental question about the nature of matter itself. A direct neutrino is a standard particle. It's distinct from its antiparticle. A Majorana neutrino, however, would be its own antiparticle. If neutrinos are Majorana particles, it could provide a mechanism to explain why there is so much more matter than antimatter in the universe, which is one of the biggest outstanding problems in cosmology.
That's incredible. Now, moving from subatomic particles to complex molecular structures, let's talk about this revolutionary imaging tool called magnetic isolation and concentration, or MAGIC.
MAGIC is a major enhancement for cryo-electron microscopy, or cryo-EM. That's the technique that won the Nobel Prize for allowing scientists to map large, flexible macromolecules with incredible detail. But the traditional Achilles heel of cryo-EM was the required sample concentration.
The samples had to be highly concentrated to be analyzed.
Yes. If your molecule of interest was rare or difficult to synthesize, say a receptor protein from a cell, you might not have enough of it in a high enough concentration to image it. MAGIC solves this by allowing the analysis of samples that are up to 100 times more dilute than was previously possible.
How does the magnetic part of it work?
Researchers use these tiny magnetic particles to tag the target molecule they're interested in. Then they use magnetic fields to isolate and concentrate those specific molecules, effectively cleaning the sample and increasing the local density right before the cryo-EM freezing and analysis step.
So this will accelerate drug discovery.
Dramatically, especially in complex areas like studying membrane proteins or low-abundant cellular factors. It just means faster breakthroughs for new therapeutics.
Finally, let's touch on two fascinating cultural and historical points that show how we reconcile the past with the present. First, this new discovery in archaeology.
This is the discovery of an early Harappan habitation and burial site found at Lakkapar in Kutch, Gujarat. It dates back to around 3300 to 2600 BCE. While we know of many Harappan sites, the rare finding here is a human burial found in association with pre-Prabhas pottery.
And why is that pottery so significant?
The pre-Prabhas pottery links the earlier Chalcolithic cultures of Saurashtra, like Pravazapatan, directly with the emerging, more urbanized Harappan culture. This finding challenges those simplistic linear models of history. It shows that different lifestyles, foragers, agro-pastoralists, and urban precursors all coexisted and interacted heavily in Gujarat during that critical phase.
And then there's this unique paradox facing Goa's traditional music heritage with the Ghumot revival.
The Ghumot is a traditional mud-based membranophone. It's central to Goan folk music, used during major festivals like Ganesh Chaturthi. It was declared the state heritage instrument in 2019, which emphasizes its cultural importance.
But its traditional composition ran straight into modern conservation law.
Exactly. Traditionally, the instrument's head, the membrane, was often covered with monitor lizard skin to get a specific tonal quality. However, the use, possession, or trade of monitor lizard skin is strictly prohibited under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972.
So it forced a necessary cultural adaptation.
It did. Artisans now rely entirely on legal alternatives, primarily goatskin. It's a perfect small-scale example of how deeply embedded traditional practices must quickly and complexly change to comply with modern ecological and wildlife protection mandates.
That clash between heritage, wildlife conservation, and adaptation is a great lens to summarize our whole discussion. We have covered an immense distance in this deep dive. We started with the sheer financial force of a digital economy transacting nearly 24 trillion rupees a month on UPI. We moved through the heavy engineering of deep underground nuclear bunkers and strategic tunnels along the Losi, and we've ended with the molecular precision needed to measure fractions of mass for a neutrino or to design a heat stress switch in a plant.
The analysis confirmed that whether we're talking about why our municipal drainage systems are failing or how we can use AI with CROPIC to accelerate crop insurance claims, the theme is always about managing risk and accelerating innovation. We saw the tightrope walk of global diplomacy over enrichment levels and the paralysis of domestic projects because of complex liability laws like the CLNDA.
And the relevance for you, the learner, is clear. These specific, detailed points, from high-altitude logistics to molecular biology, are the critical data points you need to comprehend the overall trajectory of India's technological adoption and the complexities of global governance. You really need the specifics to see the bigger picture.
And that brings us right back to the Ghumot instrument. We saw how its cultural heritage had to adapt its traditional composition replacing monitor lizard skin to comply with wildlife protection laws that were established decades ago. So this raises an important question for you to think about. What happens when our newest, most radical technologies, like the AI running our financial algorithms, the high-speed military drones defining modern conflict, or the CRISPR tools changing biomanufacturing? What happens when they run into ethical, legal, or regulatory frameworks that were designed decades or even centuries before those technologies were even conceivable? How quickly must law and society evolve to manage the next generation of risk and reward that this radical, rapid innovation is bringing us, that regulatory lag? That's the challenge of the future. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You've made it through the mountain of source material we covered this past month. You know, all those articles on economic policy, the deep dives into governance, and the historical context that's really shaping modern India. This session, our final consolidations, are where we stop just reading and really start applying.
That's exactly right. We're moving from just, taking in data to actually creating a structural map for it. All that information you've absorbed on global affairs, economics, governance needs to be organized. So our mission today is kind of twofold. First, we need to consolidate these complex issues into really definitive, recallable facts. That's for your prelims focus. And second, we need to build these robust, nuanced analytical frameworks that you can actually deploy for your long-form mains answers.
Exactly. Think of this as the final high-yield polish. We're taking this massive volume and structuring it so you can retrieve it under pressure. We're going to start with those non-negotiable facts you just have to know cold. Then we'll pivot hard into evaluating some major structural problems, like the FDI paradox and the urban drainage crisis. And we'll wrap up with essential critical frameworks, including a look at one of the most complex legal dilemmas facing India's energy future right now, the nuclear liability law.
And we need to make sure that every key insight is organized, contextualized, and, ready for you to use analytically. So let's just jump straight in.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with 6 facts that should really stick. These are the kind of geographical, historical, and institutional quick hits that underpin, well, pretty much the whole current affairs landscape. Speed and accuracy matter here, but we also need to get the significance of each fact, not just the fact itself.
Absolutely. Recall without context is, frankly, useless.
Right. Starting with geography and history.
Yeah.
First up, Shipkila Pass. You absolutely need to know its precise location. Himachal Pradesh, specifically in the Kinnaur district. Now, why does this matter? Because the pass is the crucial entry point for the river Sutlej into India from Tibet. This geographical link pass, district, river, it's primary and it gets tested a lot. Understanding its location is also, understanding a key historical trade route.
And moving to history, Sant Kabir. You have to recall his philosophical core and his historical context. He was a profound proponent of Nirguna Bhakti. I mean, what does that mean? Formless worship. He basically rejected ritualism, idol worship, and the need for priests. And the significance of this is huge because by stripping away ritual, he created this egalitarian spiritual space that just bypassed the rigid caste system of his time. Contextually, you have to place him as a contemporary of Sultan Sikandar Lodi, and remember, he's seen as a disciple in the intellectual tradition of Ramananda. It just shows you the currents of that 15th century world.
Yeah, that context is everything. Fact number 3, the Total Revolution, 1974. This should immediately make you think of one person, Jayaprakash Narayan, or JP. You need to frame its political context clearly. It was a movement against, well, rampant corruption, severe unemployment, and crippling inflation. I mean, it was the perfect storm of socioeconomic failure. This massive civil unrest driven by students wasn't just a protest. It was a major precursor, or, arguably the trigger for the declaration of the emergency in 1975, a vital moment.
It was. Now, let's transition to governance and economy basics. Fact 4, the World Investment Report. This report is the go-to source for tracking global investment, and you must know its publisher. That is UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And the recent reports have signaled some really worrying shifts, particularly a big drop in investment towards the SDG sectors globally. For India, that's a major red flag we have to be ready to analyze.
Fact 5, the Green India Mission. Okay, structurally, where does this fit in? It's not a standalone policy. This is key. It is one of the 8 foundational national missions under the umbrella of the National Action Plan on Climate Change, the NEPCC. Understanding that nested structure is everything, it defines the mission as part of India's overall climate strategy, focusing on increasing forest cover.
And just to expand on that a bit, the NAPCC missions are meant to tackle specific climate impacts. The Green India mission specifically targets climate adaptation and mitigation through afforestation. You need to see it in relation to the others, like the National Solar Mission or the one for the Himalayan ecosystem.
Right, they all fit together. And finally, governance fact number 6, the Competition Commission of India, CCI. You have to know its legal nature. The CCI is a statutory body. What does that mean? It means its authority comes directly from a specific act of Parliament. The Competition Act, 2002. We've seen it in the news recently, right? For its action on predatory pricing, specifically with these new determination of cost of production regulations for 2025, it shows the CCI is actively intervening to stop dominant firms from crushing smaller competitors. Okay, that's our rapid-fire run. Now we're shifting gears, moving into analytical mode. We're going from definite facts to evaluating these really complex trends and structural challenges.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We're focusing on 2 major structural fault lines in the Indian economy and our urban infrastructure. Both are absolutely critical for your GS3 paper. The goal here is to develop a framework that goes beyond just stating the problem and really analyzes the causes and the policy responses.
Let's start with that central economic riddle. foreign direct investment, FDI, and what we call the employment paradox. I mean, India is constantly trying to attract global capital. We celebrate these huge gross inflows, but why, and this is the critical question, why isn't this investment generating the mass employment we so desperately need?
It's a deep, deep structural challenge. And the recent RBI 2024-25 report, it gives us some crucial evidence that the quality of our FDI is, well, it's far from optimal. We have to synthesize a few key data points to really get this paradox. First, the long-term trend is troubling. Gross inflows show really sluggish growth, averaging just 0.3% annually over the last 4 years. Any short-term surge is just masking that.
And the problem gets worse when capital doesn't just enter, but it leaves at an alarming rate.
Precisely. That's the second point. Net inflows are collapsing. We saw a huge surge in repatriation and disinvestments capital flying back out of India. It rose by 18.9% annually after the pandemic. This has caused the net FDI to just drop dramatically, basically halving to $29.6 billion. We are retaining so much less productive capital.
Wow. So not only is the inflow growth stagnant, but nearly half the money that does come in, or was already here, is just leaving. That sounds like a pretty clear signal of, what, policy instability, or just an inability to get good returns.
It does, and this leads to the third and maybe most critical data point, the composition distortion. When you look at where the money is coming from, you see enormous flows from financial hubs like Singapore, that's 15% of inflows, and Mauritius, close to 10%. This heavy reliance on financial gateways suggests that a lot of this is just financial flows, portfolio investment money chasing quick returns or tax benefits, not true, ground-up investments that build factories and create jobs.
So if the money isn't coming from core industrial nations for real manufacturing, it feels like we're just attracting financial capital, which is, it's capital intensive by nature, not labor intensive.
And that suspicion is confirmed by the final data point. The share of FDI going into manufacturing has dropped to a worrying low of 12%. Now, this is where we have to connect the dots back to the policy response, specifically the production-linked incentive, or PLI, schemes.
Yes, that's the big policy lever. The government has poured resources into PLI to boost domestic manufacturing. But if the FDI share in manufacturing is still dropping, then the policy just doesn't seem to be bridging that capital gap.
The paradox is really solved by this failure to target the right kind of investment. The FDI we're getting is increasingly focused on high-tech, highly automated, or just purely financial services sectors. Now, these are important, but they are capital intensive. They just don't absorb unskilled or semi-skilled labor at the colossal scale India needs. The PLI schemes, while they're attracting some assembly units, they haven't managed to overhaul the entire manufacturing ecosystem to draw in that truly transformative labor-intensive FDI.
So the core of your Mains answer here has to be about the type of capital. It's not just the gross number. It's about attracting high-quality FDI into traditional labor-intensive sectors like textiles, footwear, food processing, the ones that have always driven mass employment.
Precisely. We're seeing a mismatch between the investment we attract and the employment needs of our demographic dividend. Policymakers have to pivot away from just chasing that headline number and toward attracting investment that directly fixes this employment gap.
That is a tremendously powerful framework for GS3. Okay, let's pivot from finance to a different kind of systemic failure, the urban crisis. Specifically, the drainage collapse we see every single monsoon in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai. I mean, we're talking about catastrophic failure under predictable strain.
And this failure isn't about global market forces. It's about a failure of planning, of governance, and of long-term resilience. The flooding crisis that results is fundamentally a man-made issue, layered on top of, yes, a changing climate. It really reflects a complete lack of civic accountability.
Okay, let's break down those root causes, starting with what's happening on the ground.
The first failure point is just this unchecked march of unplanned urbanization. This has two major problems: mass encroachment on natural floodplains and widespread concretization. When you pave over everything, the ground can't absorb water. The rainwater has nowhere to go but to flood the surface. We've seen shocking data like Mumbai losing 80% of its natural water bodies, its kidneys, really, in the past 40 years. That just kills the city's natural water retention.
And the systems we do have are ancient. They weren't built for the climate we have now.
That's the second critical point: outdated design standards. We have systems like Mumbai's storm drains designed in the 1860s to handle maybe 25 millimeters per hour of rainfall. Today, we're frequently seeing storms over 100 millimeters per hour. The infrastructure is designed for a 1-in-2-year event, which is just completely insufficient when 1-in-10-year events are becoming the norm.
And beyond just the capacity, there's the functional breakdown. the mess caused by mixing all our waste.
Systemic failure is rampant because of poor integration. Many cities, even major ones like Patna and Bhopal, they suffer from mixing sewage with stormwater because they don't have separate lines. This isn't just an infrastructure problem, it's a public health disaster. The combined waste blocks the drains, and then poor maintenance ensures the system clogs at the first major rain.
Right. It's easy to talk about 100 millimeters of rain as a statistic, but that means someone's home is destroyed, their business is wiped out. So given this catastrophic reality, the solution everyone talks about is turning our cities into sponge cities. But can government initiatives actually do that?
The concept is sound. You're aiming to absorb, retain, and reuse water locally instead of just flushing it out of the city. And the intention of current policies is definitely moving in the right direction. We see a clear policy shift in the manual on stormwater drainage systems from 2019. It acknowledges the new climate reality by recommending much higher design standards for 1 in 5 or even 1 in 10-year events. That's essential.
But what about translating that policy into real schemes on the ground?
That's where we see integrated management efforts. AMERDU 2.0 now mandates integrated stormwater networks. And at the micro level, the model building bylaws from 2016 make rainwater harvesting compulsory for plots over 100 square meters. These legislative pushes are critical.
But implementation is always the challenge, right? Especially enforcing those bylaws.
Always. The final piece is the restoration and technology push. For large-scale restoration, the Amrit Sarovar mission focuses on rejuvenating urban water bodies to act as natural sponges. And on the tech front, cities like Delhi are finally using GIS-based drainage mapping. They're moving beyond old physical maps to use real-time data. These initiatives, together, aim to build that sponge city capacity, but they require uncompromising political will, especially when it comes to removing illegal encroachments.
That's the crux, isn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of accountability and systemic breakdown, when a city fails year after year, it forces you to ask where the responsibility lies. That very question is what Jayaprakash Narayan's Total Revolution was built on 50 years ago.
Yes, and this thematic connection is so crucial. The systemic failures we see today in planning, in the economy, are rooted in the same lack of grassroots accountability that JP challenged in 1974. Let's zoom out to that historical moment.
Right. We established the 1974 timing, the backdrop of unrest, inflation, corruption, all leading to the emergency in 75. But it was so much more than a protest. JP envisioned a holistic, top-to-bottom societal overhaul. That's why he called it Total Revolution.
Yes, his vision was foundational. It was a set of interlocking revolutions aimed at changing not just the political structure, but the moral and social fabric of the country. A bit utopian, maybe, but hugely influential.
Let's break down the major components of that vision, starting with the political revolution.
This was the most famous part. He advocated for Sampurna Kranti Total Revolution, which emphasized participatory democracy, not just voting every few years. JP demanded accountability, political decentralization, pushing for bottom-up governance to counter the authoritarian tendencies he saw. Power, he argued, must be at the grassroots level.
Then there was the economic revolution, which was aimed squarely at disparity.
That's right. It saw equitable land redistribution and a shift towards self-reliant, people-centric development. He argued against the kind of centralized, top-down industrialization that he felt had failed rural India, creating massive inequality.
And the social revolution was really focused on cultural and ethical reform, almost echoing reformers like Sant Kabir.
Precisely. It championed the eradication of deep-seated social ills. Casteism, gender discrimination, the dowry system. JP aimed to build a genuinely egalitarian society. The ethical part was central to his vision.
And crucially, the educational revolution was designed to support all of this.
Yes, this proposed a complete overhaul of the curriculum to emphasize ethics, civic duties, and vocational skills. The goal was to create engaged, self-sufficient citizens, not just degree holders.
Finally, anchoring all of this was the cultural spiritual revolution.
This was the moral underpinning. It aimed for a moral rejuvenation, self-discipline, and national unity, all driven by individual transformation. He believed the nation could only be regenerated if individuals changed themselves.
And when you look at the lasting impact, it wasn't just talk. It fundamentally changed governance. What was the most immediate legacy, especially for the political class?
The most immediate impact was that massive youth political mobilization. The movement was a training ground for an entire generation of politicians who went on to define the politics of states like Bihar for decades. People like Lalu Prasad, Nitish Kumar, Sushil Modi. It showed that mass movements could generate future national leaders outside the established parties.
And on the broader democratic system itself, how did it change how citizens viewed governance?
It dramatically deepened civic consciousness. Public accountability and transparency, they became mainstream issues. The movement redefined what citizens expected from their representatives, a legacy that fuels protest movements even today. Plus, its method, that reassertion of nonviolent Gandhian resistance, created a powerful template, one that clearly influenced movements like Anna Hazar's anti-corruption crusade years later.
That historical perspective gives us so much context. Now let's move into the final gear Mains analysis frameworks. This is all about converting this information into structured, high-scoring answers.
Which raises an important question. How do we actually do that? We're consolidating this knowledge into structured arguments ready for your papers. We'll look at frameworks for GS1, GS2, and GS3.
Let's start with the GS1 topic, connecting to the Bhakti movement. The question is, how did the Bhakti movement, specifically the Nirguna school, act as a bridge for social integration in medieval India? For this, you need a framework that explains the precise mechanisms of integration.
Right. The framework needs 3 pillars, all rooted in Nirguna Bhakti. First, focus on the core principle, a formless God. This idea inherently rejected idol worship and the elaborate rituals of the Brahminical system. By stripping away ritual, the movement basically neutralized the caste hierarchy that relied on priests. It created a more egalitarian spiritual space for everyone.
So the spiritual playing field was instantly leveled just by making God non-exclusive.
Exactly. Which leads to the second mechanism, providing a direct, inclusive path for marginalized groups. Figures like Sant Kabir, they actively promoted radical equality and spoke out against caste distinctions. Their teachings offered spiritual salvation and dignity to everyone, regardless of birth. This made the movement a powerful magnet for marginalized groups.
And the third mechanism is about communication. How did this revolutionary idea even spread?
The genius was using vernacular languages. They rejected the elite Sanskrit and used local dialects like Bhojpuri, Awadhi, simple Hindi to communicate. This linguistic democratization created massive appeal and allowed the message of equality to cut across regional and social divides, turning it into a vibrant grassroots people's movement.
That's a really strong, structured approach for GS1.
Okay.
Now, for a critical GS2 question on public finance and Social Security, evaluate the fiscal and social implications of shifting back to the old pension scheme, OPS, versus strengthening the national pension system, NPS.
This requires a balanced, two-sided analysis. You have to contrast the immediate social comfort of OPS with its devastating long-term economic hazard. It's a classic dilemma between political expediency and fiscal sustainability.
So let's start with the argument against OPS, the fiscal challenge. Why is it so dangerous?
The core issue with OPS is that it's an entirely unfunded liability. Under OPS, pensions are guaranteed defined benefits, paid entirely out of current government revenue. This means today's workers aren't funding their own retirement, future taxpayers are. This liability is unfunded and grows exponentially, placing an immense strain on future state budgets, potentially taking money away from things like infrastructure, health, or education.
But if it's so fiscally dangerous, why are states risking it to bring it back? What social pressure does the NPS fail to address that makes OPS so attractive?
And that's the social implication you have to address, the assurance factor. OPS offers an ironclad Social Security guarantee. Employees know exactly what they'll get when they retire, no matter what the market does. This certainty is paramount, especially for employees who can't afford market risks. The perception is that NPS is just too uncertain.
Okay, so the analysis for NPS can't just be about its fiscal prudence. It has to be about strengthening it to fix that Social Security anxiety. How do we argue for improving it?
You contrast the OPS guarantee with improving the NPS's efficiency and safety. Strengthening NPS involves a few things. First, maybe enhancing the government's contribution, especially for lower income groups, to provide a higher minimum floor for their returns. Second, demanding better professional fund management. The goal is to balance fiscal health, which NPS ensures, with providing an adequate and secure retirement.
So a good Mains answer would conclude with a nuanced policy recommendation. Strengthening NPS is better fiscally, but it only becomes socially acceptable if the government intervenes to build in guarantees and minimize risk.
Precisely. That is robust, policy-oriented analysis. Now let's turn to GS3 again, with a question on our earlier discussion. Discuss the FDI paradox in the Indian economy. Why is investment not translating into expected employment generation?
The framework here has to be those 3 points we discussed: the quantity crisis, the quality crisis, and the policy mismatch.
Correct. Start by defining the paradox. High FDI headlines versus stagnant job creation. Then, Pillar 1, the quantity crisis. You detail the data on sluggish inflow growth and the collapsing net FDI due to repatriation. This shows the capital base is unstable. Pillar 2, the quality crisis. You explain the composition distortion high inflows from financial hubs like Singapore and Mauritius, indicating it's often portfolio investment. Connect this to the sharp drop in manufacturing FDI.
And Pillar 3, the policy mismatch.
Yes. Argue that FDI is flowing into capital-intensive high-tech sectors favored by schemes like PLI, which require fewer workers. The money is not funding the labor-intensive traditional manufacturing sectors. So the conclusion has to be that we need to pivot our incentives to attract capital into high-employment sectors.
And finally, let's frame the urban challenge for GS3. Critically analyze the environmental impact of unplanned urbanization. Can sponge cities be a viable solution for India?
This is a classic causes and solution structure. Part 1. The analysis of impact. Discuss the environmental damage, loss of wetlands, reduced ground permeability, mixing sewage and stormwater. This shows a breakdown in the urban ecological balance.
And Part 2, the solution's viability.
Right. Here you define the sponge city concept and link it to current initiatives. You discuss the policy shifts, the integrated management efforts like AMRO 2.0 and mandatory rainwater harvesting, and the tech tools like GIS mapping. But the critical analysis part must conclude that viability hinges not on technology or policy design, but on strict implementation and the political will to remove illegal encroachments. That's the biggest hurdle.
That's robust analysis across all the core GS papers. So for you, the listener, you've now synthesized high-yield facts, dissected macroeconomic realities, and built these frameworks for evaluation.
We have reached the end of this consolidation, but before we wrap up completely, we do have one final provocative thought for you. A high-stakes legal and geopolitical dilemma. Let's talk about the deep complications around India's nuclear liability law.
This is the legal elephant in the room that has stalled billions in foreign investment for clean energy. We're talking about the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act, or CLNDA, from 2010.
Precisely. The CLNDA provides the legal framework for compensation in case of a nuclear accident. It establishes that the operator is strictly liable, capped at a certain amount. But the core dilemma, the conflict that stops major international players from building reactors in India, lies in the gap between contractual risk and statutory risk.
India defends the law, saying it aligns with the International Convention on Supplementary Compensation model. But the language in the law itself creates exceptions that make foreign suppliers feel really unprotected.
That's the crux of it. Two clauses are notoriously problematic. The first is Section 17B, which gives the operator a right of recourse against the supplier if the accident is caused by faulty equipment. So, the operator can sue the supplier to recover the compensation they paid.
That sounds reasonable on the surface, but international suppliers argue that this right should be purely contractual meaning, only if they agree to it in the contract. But 17B makes it statutory, whether they agree or not.
Exactly. But the second clause, Section 46, is the real deal breaker. Section 46 is complex, but it basically permits additional proceedings under other Indian laws. This exposes foreign suppliers to unlimited, open-ended liability through tort law, general civil injury law, even if they explicitly excluded that liability in their contracts.
Let me try to frame this with an analogy, the way you might in the mains answer.
Please do.
Okay, imagine you buy a sophisticated robot for your factory, and the contract says the manufacturer is liable for up to, say, $1 million if it fails catastrophically. That's your contractual limit. But Section 46 is like a second separate law that allows you to sue that manufacturer for unlimited damages under a different injury claim if their robot explodes and hurts people, completely overriding that $1 million limit.
That is precisely the conflict. India is saying, we have a cap and a clear compensation path, but the law itself provides a legal escape route for tort claims that bypasses the contractual safety net. This is why projects like Kavada and Jayaprakash stall. Major partners are just deterred by this ambiguous high-risk domestic law.
And there's a moral hazard here too, isn't there? The existing Russian-backed Kudankulam plant predates this law,
so it's protected. But the government is demanding new foreign investment to meet its clean energy targets.
The dilemma is acute. We have to ask, can India achieve its future energy security goals without fully resolving this fundamental conflict between a contractual agreement and statutory risk? The credibility of India as a nuclear partner really hinges on providing certainty by clarifying or amending Sections 17B and 46. It's a conflict between national sovereignty and global technological partnership.
A crucial, high-stakes policy question to end on.
Yeah.
You now have the facts, the frameworks, and the ability to dissect these deep structural issues.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we've structured the most complex material from the past month into easily recallable and analyzable units. And that brings us to the end of this comprehensive June 2025 Roundup.
We hope this deep dive added significant value to your preparation. If it did, and if you are financially capable, please do support Simplified UPSC by PBG by clicking the Join button and becoming a member. Your contribution directly funds the research and production of these lectures.
Once again, a huge thank you to our existing members. You guys are the best. To everyone watching, please like this video, share it with your study groups, and comment below. Which June topic was the most difficult for you? We read every comment. This has been Simplified UPSC by PPP. Keep studying, stay consistent, and see you in the next briefing. Jai Hind.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.